There's a higher chance of rain tomorrow than there was today. Higher? So it's 50%. It may or may not. So then when one person speaks, they take up the whole screen. Oh, that's cool.
On November 1st, 2022. We are the Carmel-by-the-Sea City Council. Nova, could I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmember Barron?
Here.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Here.
Councilmember Tice?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Here.
Mayor Potter?
Here.
All are present.
Excellent. Would you please lead us in the pledge, Nova?
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well done. All right, next item is public appearance items. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. 3-minute limitation on that testimony. If you'd state the name for the record, I'd appreciate it. Is anybody in the House wishing to testify? I don't see anybody. In Zoom land, I do see Lucinda Lloyd has her hand up.
Thank you very much, Mayor Potter, members of the council. I just wanted to acknowledge, the passing of a former city mayor. Last night, Charlotte Townsend died. She was the mayor of Carmel until Clint Eastwood unseated her in her run for re-election. Charlotte was raised in Carmel. She was an accomplished race car driver, sailboat racer, and with an avid and undying passion for Carmel. She served out her last days caring about Carmel and informing all of her friends exactly what should be done. So I just wanted to say, Charlotte died on a day that she loved very much, which was Carmel's birthday and also Halloween. And thank you very much. And it was a lovely parade yesterday. I hope next year we'll all be remembering Charlotte as well.
Thank you, Cindy. We will be standing adjourned in Charlotte Townsend's memory when we adjourn today. Next speaker is Janice Brandner. Janice, the floor is yours. Janice?
Oops, sorry. Carmel Cares and Carmel Residents Association both have a monthly presence at the farmers market. We get a lot of feedback from the residents about various topics affecting them, and addresses are one of the many topics we get a lot of feedback about. Not having an address sometimes causes inconveniences. Nobody denies that. We've all had to stand in our driveways to flag down visitors and deliveries. We've all received deliveries or had deliveries sent to the wrong physical address. We've all had insurance companies or financial institutions not accept a P.O. box as an address on an application. But I haven't heard anybody say that they have been denied insurance, utilities, or any other services for a lack of address. The process of setting up these services has been an inconvenience for all of us. I myself spent 2 hours on the phone with a call center in the Philippines that was handling my application for prescription coverage because they couldn't understand the concept of not having a conventional street address. Have the police chief or fire chief expressed concerns about the lack of house numbers? Has anyone asked the fire department or police department to provide statistics about the number of times they've shown up at the wrong address because of our current directional address configuration? We really think that these would be key data points in the decision to assign house numbers to the homes in Carmel. Assigning house numbers to the homes in our tiny little village is the thin edge of the wedge. Before long, new residents will demand home mail delivery, and I don't think that we have the police presence to respond to mail theft, which will inevitably happen every day. And if we have local mail delivery, there is no need for our post office, which is an everyday meeting place for locals, much like as Frank Devendorf envisioned. With an aging population, the post office is a key source for the sense of community, continuity, and tradition that we all strive for in this village. Two of my neighbors to the south of me have their directional addresses posted above their garages, so we rarely have misdelivered packages. And I think it was Carrie who recommended formalizing our directional addresses, and that's a great compromise for this situation. When you choose to live in Carmel, you should be choosing to accept the quirkiness of our little town. Making changes like this moves us away from being true Carmelites and makes us more like any town USA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate your testimony. Anthony Carnazzo is next. Anthony?
Hey, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Council. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
All right, wonderful. I called in for an entirely different reason, actually, to compliment y'all, but I just want to echo Ms. Janice's remarks, the previous speaker. Well said, much more articulate than I can, but I definitely echo and support everything you said. There's so many reasons that Carmel is a charming place to live. Among them are the fact that I so enjoy, and my wife Alyssa so enjoys taking our kids down to the post office, running into 5 to 10 neighbors. One time I even counted 12. It's the most charming thing in the world. Such a special part about our town. So no addresses for me. Anyways, I'm calling in actually with many words of compliment and praise for the City Council for allowing the pumpkin roll and all the festivities to take place over the weekend, celebrate, both our city birthday and Halloween, of course. I was just overjoyed, and everybody I spoke to was so complimentary about that particular tradition. It felt like we were stepping back in time in the most beautiful of ways. There were so many young families. We saw so many neighbors of all ages there, having this wonderful conversations, talking about how much they love the town. I ran into various representatives from the city, all the firefighters and policemen that we got to see along the way. It was just so sweet and so charming. I can't say enough good words of compliment for that event, and I just want to thank you for allowing that to happen. So 3 cheers for Carmel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate the comments. Neil Owen Cruz.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. About the issue of the addresses, the 2016 committee got into this very heavily. This is 1990, 91, 92. We ended up spending a lot of time contacting all the people that were involved with the post office and owned the buildings and so on and so forth. And the reason was because we had discovered in our canvassing of the entire village and what made the village work and what created the community was the fact that everybody was meeting in the post office. I don't know that other cities realize the difference that would make if they had the same requirement, which they're not going to do, but it makes all the difference in the world. That is not a minor thing. And so we went to work from, I remember, we got to make sure that the post office doesn't go away. Got to make sure that we don't lose the post office no matter what. We checked it 6 waves from Sunday. Got to make sure. It was so critical. If you start with the numbered streets, that's going to go away, and that's going to be a knife in the heart of the Carmel community. It is not a minor element. Please don't go there. You guys, I remember when we all used to know Carmel was different from everywhere else, and we had to really struggle not to become like anywhere USA. That was the job of the city government of Carmel, was to prevent us from getting sucked into the modern world. This is why we called them trends. The whole 2016, these are the trends that are going to try and eat us alive in Carmel. But the city government would back those trends off and keep us safe. This one seems to be rushing us into the latest cell phone tower systems, get the latest address systems. Why aren't we fighting all the state of California legislation that wants all these homes to come into our districts? Instead, we're going along with it. There's all kinds of cities in the state of California that are fighting that legislation. We should join with them and say, no, we're not going to accept your rezoning of Carmel, California. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Neil. Is there anybody else in Zoom land wishing to speak tonight? I don't see anybody. Is there anybody that's come into the house here after the fact on public comment?
Parker Logan.
Hold on, Parker, we have somebody here.
I'll be very short. I know you will appreciate that, Mayor Potter.
I just wanted to reiterate also Janice's stand on the addresses and how, yes, we all admit that it's a little bit of a hassle, but our Carmel traditions are so important and they make us so special. And so I'm afraid that we're just eating away one by one at these traditions that really make the difference in who we are as opposed to everywhere else. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, Parker, you're next.
Okay, I got unmuted. Appreciate all the comments thus far in the meeting. Neil, spot on, hit a lot of subjects. As your future councilman, I will help protect all of those things that keep Carmel so charming. One of the major threats to our community that no one's talking about is the carpetbagger. We all remember that term. It's a political candidate who seeks election in an area where they have no local connection, or a person perceived as an unscrupulous opportunist. So, in light of Council Member Barron's new directory to be referred to not by his first name but as Council Member Barron, I think we should aptly counteroffer that and refer to him as Carpetbagger Barron.
Mr. Logan, Parker, let's keep it civil.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm keeping it civil.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else wishing to speak on a positive note tonight? I don't see anybody. I'll close the public comment period. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, go right ahead. Come on up, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
Hello, my name is David O'Neill, and I'm a local resident, full-time. And before moving here, we lived in France and restored a crumbling chateau. We also worked closely with the local council to protect and revitalize the nearby village. We often use Carmel-by-the-Sea as a rare example of an American town that has successfully created and preserved a village with old world charm, and how beneficial that charm has been to its residents, commerce, tourism, and property values. You and past representatives have done a wonderful job balancing the needs of this amazing community. I hope that these new design guidelines will clearly guide us toward traditional designs.
David, that's actually on the agenda tonight.
It's not?
The design guidelines are on the agenda tonight. Yes, so you'll have a full-time opportunity to comment then.
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry about that. All right, is there anybody else wishing to speak to an item that's not on tonight's agenda? All right, seeing no one, I'll close the public comment period, move on to announcements. City Administrator, Chip, what do you got?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council. I was, as you've been encouraging me, I was at an educational professional development training last month, so I wanted to thank you all for your patience with me. I wanted to thank Ms. Gullo for being up here at the dais and helping through the meeting, and the executive team, obviously, and the staff. So that's number one. Other words of thanks, I wanted to thank community activities, specifically Ms. Wright, Ms. Fenton, and Ms. Perotti, and the Community Activities Commission, and all the volunteers who helped out on our pumpkin roll on Saturday. Great event. The issue with the projector for the movie was not our issue. So we tried for 2 hours to get that movie to play, but it didn't play. And I wanted to thank everyone who helped out and took part in yesterday's parade. I did get some feedback that we can talk about next year when we're planning our events and the way we plan them. I like the way that Ms. Wright has planned them. But I did get some feedback from the business community I'll talk to you about individually, Council. But we'll certainly publicize our list of events and the dates and the days and the times when you adopt them next year. So again, thanks to everyone for a great parade, and thank the white shirts and the CERT team and everybody who took part. That's all I had, Mr. Mayor.
Well said. City Attorney, no announcements?
No announcements.
That's good thing. Okay, council members, looking to my right. Councilmember Richards.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So today I had the honor, I guess you could say, of speaking at Carmel High for their Public Policy Club. It was an interesting conversation, and what a great group of kids. Also, during the parade, I had 2 students driving with me in the car, and they were 2 of the mock trial team members. And, you know, they did do well in Chicago. They took 7th place in the international competition. And then one other shout out I wanted to give to the high school is they're just finishing up their fall season. So that is, well, football, cross country, water polo, field hockey, and all those kids, the average GPA of those kids is 3.7, and they're all student athletes. So I want to give a shout out to those kids. Thanks.
Thanks, Bobby. Jeff? Carrie? Karen?
Yes, Cindy beat me to it, but I did want to mention about Charlotte Townsend. And I've known Charlotte since I moved here, and she was quite an incredible person. So I just looked up something that I wanted to share with you. She was always about service, and she lived here most of her life. She moved away just a little bit of time. But in 1982, a former Carmel mayor suggested she run for mayor. City Hall was in disrepair, Townsend said, and there were reports of illegal things going on. She won election and went to work. This was during an interview. I had to move 2 garbage cans and bring a cardboard table and 2 chairs to find a place to sit, Townsend recalled. The city records were kept in the basement in shoeboxes and were covered with ants. And the planning director kept everything in his head. He never wrote anything down, which I thought was pretty interesting. But it goes on in this interview, and they asked Doug Schmitz at the time for a comment about Townsend, and I think that this is something to remember today. When I think of Charlotte, I think of her 7 most endearing attributes: gratefulness for what she has, her health, her long life, living in Carmel-by-the-Sea, and for her friends, giving to her friends and to her community, positiveness about life, health, her garden, politics, international, national, local, service to the greater Carmel community and its organizations, hospitality, always finding reasons for get-togethers with friends and for games in her garden, inquisitiveness, continues to read and ask questions on a variety of subject matters, and a jokester, ends most conversations by telling a joke and with a hearty laugh. She lived 9 decades, and she served her community well. At 97, she was still serving on the Carmel Area Wastewater District. I think Charlotte presented a life to be admired and one to try to follow. So I just want to say, I had the privilege of spending some time with her in Baja at a whale watching, and she was really a lot of fun. Those were all appropriate attributes. So I think we should remember her service, and I'm glad we're signing off today in her name. Thank you,
Very
Dave.
nicely said, Karen. Very well done. I might just like to double up on the appreciation for me and my family for the parade and the wonderful pumpkin roll. It was quite epic. Karen and I actually had a roll off. She beat me.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I thought you did. Yours had the big
No,
pumpkin.
yours went in the thing. Mine got.
Oh, beautiful.
We needed a.
Oh, I feel exonerated. I've been so embarrassed.
I think next year we need a Zamboni because there was mine bounced off.
It was a good time. We actually had my 98-year-old mother-in-law and my 100-year-old aunt stationed at the bottom of the ocean. We make the turn on Monteverde. Unfortunately, Gene accelerated just a little too fast and almost dropped Ginny and I on the street, but it worked out well. It was a great day, honestly, so thank you, Ashley, for you and your crew. Your peacock plumage was excellent. Well done.
Well done.
Now, with the council's indulgence, I'm going to make a slight procedural change in the calendar and move item number 16, which is introduction and adoption of an urgency ordinance 2022-006, urgency ordinance of the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea, adopting rules of conduct for attending the meetings of legislative bodies and city facilities. I think this was a mistake on my part. It should have been at the start of the agenda earlier on so we could free ourselves of our mass. Is there any objection to council members by making that move? All right.
You move, I'll second it.
Okay. I'll move to move it up on the agenda. We'll have that now as the next item action before the consent calendar. Nova, would you like to do a brief presentation on this?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you remember, at the last City Council meeting, Council directed staff to return with a new urgency ordinance to repeal and replace the current urgency ordinance, which is 2022-002, with new rules of conduct for attending meetings of legislative bodies. The guidance that was given to staff was to change the rules for attending meetings to face masks are required to be worn regardless of vaccination status if the community level at the time of the agenda posting is medium or high. The CDC level is updated weekly, so whatever the level is at the time that the agenda is posted will be put on the agenda, so that way the public knows whether masks are going to be required or not. And that Council also directed that proof of vaccination no longer be a requirement to attend meetings. So the full text of the ordinance is in the packet and also online, but the main section that was changed was 7.3, face coverings, and it says in bold on the screen there that no person will be permitted under the new guidelines to attend a meeting unless they're wearing a face covering at all times when the CDC level is, community level is medium or high. And if, let's see, upon request, anybody who needs a mask when they come to the meeting will provide one for them. But the other parts of the ordinance, such as the listing of what a city facility is and a legislative body, those are the same as the previous ordinance. There is one thing to consider though, for this time, under section 7.2 of the ordinance, Council may consider clarifying the term legislative body. So instead of listing City Council, Planning Commission, and the other commissions, we could change it to use the Government Code's definition of a legislative body, which is Government Code section 54952, and that's described below. By making this change, it makes it a little less specific, but still covers every legislative body that the city has. The other option that we could do is amend that section and list all of the specific committees and commissions by name. So in summary, this urgency ordinance, it does require a 4/5 vote to pass. And if it's passed, it will take effect immediately and will remain in effect until rescinded by council. It also will automatically repeal the previous rules. So the recommendation is that council adopt the proposed urgency ordinance 2022-006 with an amendment to section 7.2 to change the meaning of the term legislative body to the Government Code definition. Are there any questions?
Any questions by council members of Nova? Excellent presentation. I'm going to go out to the public and see if there's anybody in the public who wishes to speak to this item tonight.
Mr. Mayor, real briefly again, if you use the Government Code section, as you form new committees and groups that help support you, they would fall under that banner. So we wouldn't have to amend the ordinance to list the new committee, sir.
Makes sense. Okay, is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item tonight? I don't hear anybody. I don't see anybody. Bring it back to council for action. Council members? I would go ahead and make the motion then to go ahead and approve the staff recommendation with the change in the description of the legislative body as recommended.
Second.
Any other discussion? Nova, could we get a roll call?
Did you want to adopt it as it's proposed or with that amendment to change the term of legislative body?
We're going to go to the Government Code definition.
Yeah. Okay,
exactly.
Great. Okay, so Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
A motion passes unanimous.
Free at last. Thank you. Well, you've aged a little bit, but we all look good. All right, why don't we move on to the consent calendar? There's 7 items on the consent calendar. Is there anybody on the council wishing to pull an item? No? All right, is there anybody in the public wishing? Yeah. Number 4.
Yes, sorry that I'm not with you here.
So we'll do our traditional pulling of number 4 then.
Yes.
All right, anybody else wishing to pull an item from on council? Anybody in the public wishing to speak to any item on the consent calendar? I don't see anybody. We'll bring it back then. Why don't we move items 1 through 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 separately, and then we'll move in motion on number 4.
So moved.
Motion and a second.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Nova, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Consent agenda passes unanimously.
Jeff, would you like to speak to item number 4 and your reasons to pull it?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I still, as I have for the past months, pulled this because I do believe that commissions should be meeting in person. And now that we have amended the urgency ordinance, I especially now do not understand why the commissions can't be meeting in person.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item? No, but you're controlling the public, so I don't know.
There's no one in Zoom.
Okay, all right. Okay, we give a motion to approve then? Or Carrie?
So moved.
Second?
A motion and a second. Any other discussion? Nova, could I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barron?
No.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-1.
All right, orders of business. It brings us back to a 2022 Car Week After Action Report. This is a synopsis of what went on during the Car Week, good, bad, and indifferent. Chip, did you want to go this, or are we going straight to the chief?
Oh, we can go straight, as Chief's queuing it up, Mr. Mayor. So, so we are asking for your direction tonight on again, when to install the alternate traffic route during Car Week. And the chief will talk to that, and he's got a great presentation. Ms. Wright is here. Ms. Wright drafted the survey that went out and included all of the comments for your benefit, for your reading pleasure. Now, again, the survey is anecdotal. It's not scientific, so that's why we did not do a summation and try to mischaracterize or characterize anything that the survey respondents provided. So again, we can answer questions about the survey, and again, the chief will talk to you about the Car Week in retrospective, and then again, hopefully get some direction from you on how to address issues next year. That's what I have, Mr. Mayor.
Chief, welcome.
Thank you. To see you all.
You've changed since last night.
It's my pleasure. Mayor, member of the councils, this is a update on this year's Car Week. This was my first. You may or may not have heard, I was unfamiliar with what this all entailed, and quite frankly, I had no idea what this was all about. So we'll speak to the 2 city-sponsored events. As everybody well knows, the 2 main, the really big events did not take place this year. So instead, we had Acura in the Park, which I attended. It was pretty neat. I'm not necessarily a car guy, but this whole car thing is very interesting by itself. So we had no major complaints in this particular issue. I thought it was well planned out. I had a lot of conversation with people in the park at the event. And if there's any questions specifically about the event.
I don't think so.
Well done. Ashley and her team planned and executed both of these events and did a good job. So the second one was the Prancing Ponies. This event was on Thursday. We closed Ocean Avenue at Junipero, and I think all the way to San Carlos. And there were some hiccups with this particular event, mostly because it kind of took some time to put together because a lot of the cars got hung up and they were supposed to come down in a parade and all get set up, but because they dealt with the concourse events coming in and parades of cars coming in for Pebble Beach, they ended up coming at different times, and it created some issues with putting everything together. And quite frankly, they didn't have, the organizers needed some help with staffing, because it really turned into a big, coming in at all different times really complicated the issue. We had some complaints about the music being too loud, and that's really it, other than the cannabis little issue. California is pretty cannabis friendly, and so we had some issues with that. Just don't like handing out cannabis in town. So, but that was quickly taken care of. I thought this was a really needed event. An all-women's car show with cars owned by women was pretty cool to me. And I thought we had a lot of conversation about how empowering it was to have women owning these really, really awesome bits and driving them in, and it was just cool. So other than that, I personally did get some negative feedback from business folks about kind of not opening up Ocean after the event. We had decided, because of some other planning, to keep it closed because the complication of opening it back up, because that was a really big event. They ran a little late, and so we kept it closed. So so I had some conversations and took some calls, and maybe unfortunately some of you may have too. I know the city administrator did. So that kind of played a role in some decision making. We had the police department as the days went on, because I kind of promised that we would keep it open as long as we could, and it just kind of complicated things for us later on. So the heavy presence of exotics, what I was not aware of, and I learned in the coming up, is that Carmel has become kind of a world famous spot for these exotic cars. And so leading up to the event, I did a lot of YouTube searching and stuff like that in preparation, and learned about the fuel run and talked to the officers. They all knew about the fuel run. But when those fuel run folks come into town, and I think, quite frankly, the absence, and we'll talk about it a little later, but the absence of having the bigger events allowed those cars to come in and just stay the entire time. And it got a bigger and bigger and bigger crowd and drew bigger spectators, so to speak. So, and that's kind of what I've mentioned here. The heavy presence of the exotics brought in people, and it continued to build as we went through. And if you're not familiar with, there is also within the car community sideshows and these bigger displays of, kind of illegal action based on cars, and they're all on car shows now, right? They have whole networks of car shows about illegal street racing and things like that. So it's really become kind of this underground big thing, and that's what we were most worried about, is having the sideshow, the illegal sideshows coming into town, which did not occur, thankfully. But anyway, the crowds kept getting bigger and bigger. So I think we talked about this already, that the lack of the large-scale events, I think, allowed them to stay and their presence grow, because they didn't have to leave and leave the town as the other events around the peninsula were going on. They had a place to stay. And I had never seen, like I said, I was new to this, and so it's the first time I'd ever been in a place where you could see $5 million supercars just sitting on the streets, literally for an entire week. They didn't move, and when they did move, there was 50 of them all around town, and I'd have fathers with their kids and families coming in just to walk around town to see these supercars sitting in town, and I'd never seen anything like it, quite frankly. And I talked to the officers, and apparently that had not been the case until this year. And I think obviously, like I talked before, with the lack of those other events that kind of would move them out and push them to somewhere else. By Friday and Saturday, there were a lot of people in town all day. And like I said, on Wednesday and Thursday, it kind of built, especially in the evenings. And we'll talk about how Carmel in the evenings, because of the presence of the cars, it turns into a cruise. And the cruise from the 1950s that my dad was involved in, and that a lot of places had, where you could take your car and other people would see how nice it is and talk about how awesome they are. But that's kind of what it started happening in the evenings. But because that kind of thing had happened before, when we used the plans from before to put the hard lockdown of Ocean Avenue in place and put in the bollards, and that really quieted it down. And because the supercars don't like to be passing in very tight spots, which is the beauty of Carmel, right? Is not a lot of space to drive big cars around, and we had the Prince of Persia and their entourages with these giant cars. They left almost immediately when we pushed them off of Ocean Avenue, whereas into the residences and smaller streets of the downtown. So they were literally driving inches from each other, so they didn't want to wreck their cars, and they left. So that was very successful. In all of the evenings, is once we did those lockdowns, it pushed them into the outsides. And we've modified also the plans every night, because what we noticed is that even though the initial plans that we'd always used in the past, or at least post 2019, is we had kind of a serpentine through town. And what that did, though, is everybody just modified. It turned into a serpentine cruise. And so the cars went a lot slower, but you had these big groups of, influencers and spectators that would just move to the different locations to where the cruise was happening. So on Saturday night, we did a more broad lockdown of Ocean Avenue, period, and pushed it all off of Ocean Avenue into 7th, 8th, and 6th and 5th. And while it was a little out of control early, it got really quiet really fast from the cruise, because it was so popular. It just created a jammed mess, and they left. So that was positive, I think. And really, I want to make this kind of the statement, is we didn't have the tenor, of the presence changed in the evenings, where during the day, the owners and the drivers of the cars were pretty well behaved. There weren't a lot of speed outs, and I had a lot of residents tell me that it hadn't been as noisy even in the evenings as it had been in the past. I don't know if that's true. I wasn't in town after 11 o'clock. But so it was really, we talked about before, is how during the evening, when the other kinds of outside, not the exotic supercars, but the more hot rods would come into town with their crews, and it kind of changed the overall tenor. And you could feel on the streets it got a little tougher and more not so polite, let's put it that way. So our planning and response, what we did before the whole thing happened is there was the previous chiefs and police folks for me had left behind a lot of documentation about plannings and kind of issues that they'd have. So I talked to our folks who said, yeah, no, that's how it should go. But then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, it got a lot bigger than they had ever seen before. So we're going to have to modify for next year's. And while I'll answer any questions about that, to some degree, I would like to keep the actual planning of what I would try to accomplish kind of under the radar, but so they can't plan around it in advance of it coming. But I think the city administrators mentioned that we really would like some conversation with you and some direction on that. So we set up for the closures in the evenings in response. That kind of always been done post 2019. The thing that was different was that there was this, and this was part of the plan that I think for sure will change in the future, and that is, before it was kind of this sliding plan of, well, when it gets real busy, we'll close Ocean Avenue, but if it's not busy, then we'll just keep it open. And so that's something I think I'll change for sure next year, is we'll just have a hard close at a certain time and just plan it to do that. And that way everybody knows ahead of time what they're going to do. Residents will know. Any spectators coming in will know what's going on. So I reached out to local agencies in advance, and quite frankly, they have a really good law enforcement planning around the entire peninsula because of Car Week and the complications. And how many people they're managing. And so we had a lot of conversation, but I found out we really didn't have a lot of extra resources to spare for Carmel, and specifically because everybody else was dealing with their own demands. So I was able to work ahead of time and get the STOP team, which is a specialty traffic unit, kind of peninsula cooperative. They came in for 2 nights. Which was really helpful for us in the long run. I also made contact with a state kind of intelligence gathering, investigatory law enforcement agency, and was in contact with them and had them looking for specifically any sideshow chatter of the illegal street racings, because they'll post things and on social media, and so they were going to notify us if there was there was chatter coming up about anything that might be coming our way. And luckily, the peninsula didn't have any of those particular issues, unlike other cities around California. But of course, we scheduled all of the staffing and personnel to cover the events. And then that's just some of the what the police officers actually did out there. We did have the one evening on Thursday. I think we had the issues with a group of subjects that were throwing rocks at the police cars and got in fights with the officers, and then at the same time we had kind of a road rage thing that really stretched us, and if not for the STOP team, we'd have had some problems. Some conclusion, I think we talked about this. The officers who'd worked here before said this was by far the biggest, and the crowds, quite frankly, overwhelmed our ability and the number of police officers we have to effectively manage the crowds, in addition to trying to control the drivers. So that's why, in light of that, I think we should have some more thinking about putting hard plans in place ahead of time on the outside, because they're coming back. I watched some of the YouTube shows that some of the supercar manufacturers were flying people here, influencers here to Carmel, and we're posting these shows that were saying, hey, Carmel's the place to come to see supercars, come. And so I'm not sure that's what our village wants to be known for. And so I think there probably are some ways that we can help manage that by not making it so friendly. Like I said, the crowds.
If I may, Chief,
yes.
and this is what the Chief just said is really central to part of the direction we're looking to you for direction tonight, because what we have heard a little bit from the business community is that the car barriers, the alternate traffic route, the barricades, the delineators that we put up and we stage on the streets is less than hospitable, that it's not as welcoming. From our perspective, we're concerned mostly about the safety of the village. And if we have to have bright orange, if Bob needs to get his barricades out there a little bit early, that's okay, in our opinion. But again, that's where we want your blessing or your direction. So thanks, Chief. I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, and okay, sorry. quite frankly, to Mr. Rarig's point, a lot of the folks I talked to, because I went and spoke to a lot of the business community after, and they essentially said the restaurants and hotels were setting records, and I was downtown when all of this was going on, and you said the restaurants were absolutely packed to capacity, which was awesome. And I talked to some of the actual storefront owners who said the folks that were coming weren't buying anything. So while the restaurants and hotels were doing really well, the retailers not necessarily, because the folks that were there, they were shutting down early because the folks that are coming to see the cars aren't buying anything. They're there to see the cars. So I think I definitely got the sense from the retailers that doing it in the evening would not have as big an impact. But I think there's definitely that conversation to have. And we were, quite frankly, very lucky with the amounts of people here Friday and Saturday. They were, especially on Saturday, much more well behaved than I could have expected, and it was really, quite frankly, a load off my mind that we didn't have any major issues on those days. Our resources were stretched thin. As we know, our normal complement is 2 officers. We staff the evenings as big as we can, no days off, and all those kinds of things. And really, it stretched us thin, especially trying to staff all of the events throughout the entire week and staff up. So that's something we'd also like to maybe have some conversations about is if we do allow groups to come in or make some other planning for events that we really have them supply their own security, so the police aren't staffing those events, because when we staff those, we have to bring them in on overtime, and now we have to staff for regular emergencies, and so that really stretches us pretty thin, especially by the end of the week, or when we're double and tripling covering the evenings. I think the other stuff, the cruising activity was killed, and what I would like to talk about, and I think Chip hit it again, is really establishing a more complex, thought out and engineered control of the Ocean Avenue area in the evenings, and having hard set. Talked about the event security, examining the increased fines and certain violations. So this was an idea I heard, and that I've heard that other towns have done already, and this was anecdotal because they told me, I didn't go check, but they said at certain times of the day or certain times of the year, instead of having a $50 fine for parking like during car week, it's $250, because the reality is the cars would come and they'd sit there, and what do they care about a fine? They'll pay them when they're all gone, but they're not moving anywhere. So that's another thing. And then no tow company wants to touch a $2.5 million car. They're not, so you can't tow them. So it really creates a very interesting law enforcement problem. So that's one of the thoughts. Creating and implementing signage and as part of a much broader plan, and putting out in the press and whatever social media we can find that, and kind of tell everybody that the Carmel, what we're going to do and what's welcome here and what's not here. And we'll use this year's information to change our plans for next year to ensure the safety and security of the village. And then if there's any questions about the survey, I thought it was kind of fun. I appreciate Ashley doing that. It was fun just to see what people had to say. And for me, I like to look at things, because you never know where a great idea is going to come, right? So, and after Car Week and after the Pine Cone had their story about it, I got a bunch of calls about people wanting to offer ideas on how they think we should adjust for Car Week. So that's that. Any questions I can answer?
Any questions of Chief Ward by council members before I open up the public for question or comments? Jeff?
Could you put up the slides again? I want to make sure I'm clear. Can you go back? Right there. So what I heard you say, Chip, was that you're looking especially for direction on the last thing up there, which is establish a plan for hard closure of Ocean Avenue. Is that right?
Yeah.
And what your concern, I want to make sure I understood this right. So your concern is that some of the businesses have said that doing that plan for hard closure of Ocean Avenue makes the village seem less hospitable to visitors. And so you're going to ask us to answer that question for you and give you direction specifically there.
Yeah, not approve a plan tonight, but if
Yes.
we get, your thumbs up, Chief Ward and his team, with Ms. Wright, obviously, as well, we'll establish a plan and we'll come back well prior to next year for your approval. But if you think everything is fine, then we won't.
So when you say everything is fine, does that,
implementation of the existing, our existing chicane, the existing placement of the barriers and car stopping devices.
So it's either stay where we were this year.
Yes, sir.
And so implement something that's kind of close, reminiscent of what we did this year, or take it a step further.
Correct.
So in that, maybe this is a question for after, but on the next slide, there's item number 3 is use this hard closure to providing opportunity for pedestrian events in the downtown. So my other, sort of a follow-up question to that is, if we did this harder closure that you're sort of asking for guidance on, do you feel that if we did that and some of these cars still came to town, that it would be safe to have these pedestrian events in the downtown? Like, is it possible to?
I think they're two different questions, really. I mean, again, you can have a hard closure where people can still, get out, or you can restrict access to the street for nothing but pedestrians and/or cars that would be parked there overnight, for example. So again, just a little bit of direction from you would be great.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions by council members of CHIP or administration? Or the chief? All right, open it up to the public. Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak this item tonight? Is there anybody in the room here before we go out to the public in Zoom world? Anybody in the house here? I don't see anybody. Okay, Zoom?
There's no one on Zoom with their hands raised. Oh, wait, Neil Cruz.
Neil, followed by Sue McLeod. Neil?
Thank you, gentlemen. Just a real quick one. I want to compliment the Carmel police on this car show week. This was a rough one. And I talked to a few of the guys separately. There was some real confrontation. This was a hard thing, I think. I don't think they want to talk about it, but I want to compliment them. And also what they are doing indirectly. This is becoming a destination for the hot cars. I know that wasn't the plan. But once again, everybody wants this as the center of attention for their show. And I think if we could do that, why not? As long as it's done carefully. Again, my compliments to the police. I think they did a wonderful job. That's all.
Thank you, Neil. Sue McLeod?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Is there any kind of a profit and loss statement? That is to say, what were the city's costs to produce this, and what did we come out in the black? I'm thinking in terms of the Concours on the Avenue. Obviously, we know the amount of money they generated that went to the Carmel Foundation. But what in this case, was it all going out? I realize that the individual businesses count, but you won't know what those are.
All right, Sue, is that the question? We'll take that under submission. Is there anybody else out there that would like to ask a question or has a comment tonight? I don't see
Parker Logan.
Oh, Parker. Go ahead.
One thing I know about these supercars is they despise speed bumps. And I think it might be a good idea to look into temporary speed bumps lining up Ocean Avenue rather than closing it down. Just make it so they can't do their hot rodding from corner to corner by just simply putting down some black and yellow caution striped rubber speed bumps, and then we don't really have to make it look like a rerouted war zone downtown, and cars just have to take it easy as they go up and down the avenue. Just a thought, might be worth looking into. Thank you.
Thank you, Parker. Is there anybody else tonight? I don't see anybody. Nobody. Do you see anybody that I don't see?
There are no more speakers on Zoom.
All right, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council. Chip, you do have a question from Mayor McLeod.
Yeah, I was going to look it up. So the punchline is that the occupancy for the period, the July-August period, was about the same as last year and 2019 pre-pandemic, but the daily overnight rate was almost 20% higher. It was at $410, almost $410 per night. So people were here. A lot of people were here, and they were paying a higher price for hotel rooms. So we haven't gotten our tranche of sales tax to know what happened yet, and it's not broken down to the level of detail that we break down our TOT. But by all accounts, financially, it was a very successful, another very successful car week for taxes for the city. If you talk to individuals in hospitality, obviously not having the organized Tuesday event, Concourse on the Avenue, people that traditionally would come in the prior weekend or Monday, Tuesday of Car Week did not come until later in the week. But again, overall, the occupancy was still very, very high, period.
All right, other questions or comments by council members? Bobby?
I have a comment. Yes, sir. So I've talked to a few people about this month or this weekend that happened, all this happened, and here is one of the ideas. I had a lengthy email from one of the constituents, and this is one of their perceptions of the barricades. Barricades, lots of flashing lights, cones and barriers everywhere, to me are the signs of a police force that is overwhelmed and in survival mode, not one that is in control. I would encourage us to get the local police force as much help as they need to calmly and firmly maintain order with all of that. So that's part of what I think you're hearing from the some of the different retail shops and restaurants is they want the firm and maintain law and order and safety, but with a different look, a look of more in control standing. And I think that's what you're going down, and that's why you're talking about it now, so I really appreciate that.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, I'd like to make some comments. I read through most of the survey, and it was, balanced between like it, didn't like it, hated it. There were comments on all those things. I happen to think with the absence of Concourse on the Avenue, which was a very, very well regimented event, people felt safe walking downtown. There were beautiful cars to look at. They were parked perfectly. It invited a different type of person that wanted to see cars, wanted to walk around, brought children, and so on. What had happened with the fuel run, and I've watched a lot of videos about the fuel run, and I looked into the fuel run, and I looked into the sponsors of the fuel run, is they are having a de facto event in our town with no permits, no regulation. They have decided to use our town and our parking places for their purpose, but it's not really a regimented or permitted event. So we can't put our 2 cents in to how we expect the behavior, how we expect the cars to be parked, our expectations are not being taken into effect at all. I found some of the days downtown dangerous. I made it I walked around down there, and there were people blocking the streets all over. They wouldn't move. They were there to see the cars. You could barely get through. And then there were people walking out into the traffic, actually, to take pictures of cars as cars were coming down. I saw several cars racing on Ocean Avenue, just from a dead stop with the screeching of the tires and so on to the next stop. If they stopped, they kind of rolled through many times. But because we do all go to the post office every day, and we have to go across those intersections, and many of us walk, and we don't have sidewalks in our town, and I don't want sidewalks in our town, but I want our town to be safe. And I really felt we were on the edge. I also went downtown one of the nights, and frankly, there was open drinking on the street. There were I think Janice Bradner would probably attest to this. There were cigarette butts everywhere. There were cigar butts. Our town was not treated particularly with respect from a lot of the people that came to view the cars. And I'm sorry, I really think maybe some overtures could be made to Fuel Run if they want to have an event in our town, have a real event where the streets are closed, the cars are parked respectfully and nicely, and people can come and view them with no pedestrians on the street, and they could follow some permitting rules. I think I would be happy to host a quality event, but just showing up, parking all day in the parking places, racing their engines, tearing up Ocean Avenue when they're finished. And I heard them for all hours in the night, because they also go down Rio Road. They sometimes do donuts in the middle of those intersections. I just think that we need to try to put some parameters around this. I also noticed that one of their sponsors is a group called Ticket Dismissers. And I wonder how many of the tickets we issued possibly got dismissed by their sponsor, because that sort of raised my attention too. So I don't know. I'm not comfortable with just turning our town over. I do think the barricades could be made a little more welcoming with maybe a banner, "Welcome to Carmel." Please, understand that we're happy you're here, but please behave. Something, a little more welcoming than just throwing out the barriers and the cones. A banner to go across them, something like that. But I'm not comfortable with turning over our town to people who don't seem to understand anything about the fact that we are a pedestrian village and a very small village. It drives a lot of our full-time residents out of town for the week. And I do feel for the retail stores, because I really don't think maybe outside of the watch stores and so on that very much commerce is done in their businesses. I'm happy for the hotels and the restaurants, but I think they're coming here for Concours events as much as anything. But thank you very much for the report.
So under the heading of "you don't know what it's got till it's gone," I guess I would say that we didn't know quite how well we had it with CODA, and now it's gone. The sentiment was we really missed it, and I do too. I do think everybody kind of realized that there was a special event. It had, personalized ownership. I think that's kind of what Karen's talking about, is like that kind of quality is indicative of a town that really cares about its reputation, its residents. Chief, I did notice that your men were putting out the barricades a lot instead of the Public Works Department. That seems like maybe it's just a timing issue, but I would think Public Works would be better equipped to go ahead and be placing cones out than you and me running around doing it. That's just an observation. And as far as the crowd changing, you do lose the lunch and brunch crowd after about 4 here. And the crowd really did shift drastically after that. It got kind of unfriendly and confrontational. And I think that I mentioned this a couple of years ago when we had some incidences when this first started happening, where maybe if we should look into what Salinas did, there's actually a fine for bad behavior when you're watching a game, an event like that, for the sideshows. If there's no crowd, there's no show, really. So if you can get a way to go ahead and discipline financially burdening the people that are encouraging this kind of behavior, seems like a good disincentive to get people to not be showing up. Also, the fact that we may be having a possibility of getting CODA back, I think we should put our efforts into that. I think we've had some good comments about that. Chip, you had some information. Ashley, do you have any information? I think we had some good news out there.
Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for letting me speak on this. I have been in regular contact with the CODA organizer. In fact, I just had a voicemail from her this afternoon. We'll be talking this week. She does currently have a permit application in for the Tuesday of Car Week, and we've been talking about what it will look like for next year if that event proceeds. I've also, and I know you have as well, all of you, been hearing different groups that are interested in putting on a car show in our town that is that same caliber of event as Concours on the Avenue or the Pebble Beach Tour d'Elegance coming through. And if you hear those conversations, please send them to me, because I know that there is that interest, but I think that there is a little bit of a lack of understanding of the level of planning, not just from filling out the city permit side of things, which I think is really important for people to understand when they go into this process, but everything else. I mean, I can tell you that the Friedmans started planning for the next year before that year's event had even taken place. I mean, they were in the thick of it. So when we're looking for Car Week event organizers and when I hear these conversations taking place, I'm really hoping to get a hold of those people to speak with them about that. And I've also been in contact with representatives of Pebble Beach to talk about, you know, the tour and how that has worked for them for the last year and whether they'll be returning. And the way that they've rerouted things for them, it's ended up being more efficient and also safer for them. Going down Ocean Avenue to make that turn with some of those cars that, I mean, I've seen steam-powered cars come into town and you're like, I hope they can make it. And a lot of times the cars coming in would stall just even getting to town. And so I understand where they're coming from and also expressed my interest if they are doing any other type of event, knowing the caliber of our partnership with Pebble Beach in the past, to please keep us in mind, and that working with us again is, you know, if the tour doesn't end up coming through again, and I'm going to keep in contact with them, you know, every couple months, just check in and see if anything's changed. But if they have any other car show types of things that they would like to do, that we would love to have them back again. Great company to work with, just like CODA organizers. So again, if you hear anything, send people to me so we can keep those conversations going and look to get back to the caliber of events that we had in the past, and kind of change the tone of where we were the last 2-3 years with the pandemic.
Thank you, Ashley, for the impromptu presentation. I know you'd fielded well. Honestly, the Friedmans set the bar very, very high for the kind of caliber of show we want. I wouldn't want us to go under that bar. I'd like to get up to it or over it. And I think it's all in the planning. There may be people that are very well intended and want to be part of this community, but if they don't know how to do it, it's not going to get done right. And I think Ashley's got the playbook along with Jeannie Friedman. So thank you.
If you don't mind, can I make one more comment? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, what, Jeff?
After Chief comments, I'd like to
thank
comment
you.
as well.
No, I wasn't cutting it off. I was just, go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. Yes. Okay. So there was one big thing that I didn't mention, but we've been having conversation about kind of on a law enforcement level, and it speaks to when I mentioned engineering controls, and I think something that we should think about the safety of the village going forward is how the new wave of terrorism essentially using vehicles against pedestrians. So if we are going to think about being a city that sponsors events, then we should seriously consider making an investment in engineering controls that will protect our spectators and pedestrian walkways in our streets in that downtown area. So we've gone a little bit towards that, but it needs to be more broad if we're really thinking about that.
Well said, Chief.
So,
Carrie?
Thank you. I think social media obviously has changed what Concourse Week used to be. Concourse Week used to be about antique cars, and people came here for the antique cars, and they loved not only the Tuesday CODA event, but they loved the Thursday Pebble Beach event, and people appreciated what went into those old cars. So now what we're having to deal with is, because of social media and new money, as they say, we're having to deal with these cars these exotics. So I appreciate that we're trying to figure out how to deal with this in a Carmel way. And I think that's what some of the retailers are saying is, let's be a little more softer on this, but keeping safety in mind. What we're seeing is we're seeing the same amount of people in the hotels, but we're seeing this deluge of daily visitors. Some of them have cars that make a lot of noise and are very expensive. Some are here just to record it. So once again, we're being challenged by handling and managing the daily visitor. And I think this is a good place to start because it's so overwhelming. I agree, we probably need more of the barriers. So that's something we're probably going to have to look into in terms of a budget item. But what I heard is people did miss not only the Tuesday event, but the Thursday event. And they were glad to have something downtown. Prancing Ponies was well received. So I think I know the retailers find it kind of frustrating to close Ocean Avenue, but we really have to think about the safety of our town. And I think we need to have them come together, maybe in a meeting with us, to say, look, you know, we want everybody to be safe during this crazy week. And I think that's what's paramount. So I think at this time, the other thing, Chief, are you aware of Monterey County Convention and Visitors Bureau? They have meetings months before this event to try to coordinate all this. So you definitely need to be part of those because they're coordinating with the Highway Patrol and the police. So let's try to get him on that list so that you're part of what the whole planning for the peninsula is. So I wanted to, as part of the enforcement and communication.
Excellent. Jeff?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'll just, I agree with Bobby's astute observations that he heard from the constituent about the police state look and feel. I think that that's really important for how we sort of think about and how we approach safety. I also agree with Karen's comments about the overtures to the fuel run organizers. You know, I know that there are other communities on the peninsula that have events with exotics. I don't know, obviously I don't know what they do or how they approach safety or talk to their organizers. And perhaps that will come to nothing. Perhaps it's not something that could be organized and we would have to take a more enforcement route than a sort of organization route, but it seems like there might be something there. Getting them on our side as opposed to fighting them is probably just a good thing. If that's what the result is going to be, then we need to sort of deal with the situation that we have rather than the situation that we wished we had. I also agreed, I was going to bring this up, Carrie talking about the interfacing with the MCCVB and the marketing agencies. Chip and Alan, you talked about creating a plan that you're going to bring back to the council for sort of another set of our fingerprints on it back in March and April. You know, you spoke a few minutes ago about the occupancy rate of the hotels in town, and it seems like those hotels are the perfect way to do communication, even if it's just a piece of paper that they hand to people that are coming that describes what visitors can expect, you know, what those 1,000 rooms of visitors can expect over the course of the next few days. You know, old-fashioned social media, here's what we're going to do, here's what you should expect, and so on. That seems pretty reasonable and like a pretty easy part. And so perhaps when you bring the plan back in March or April, whenever that is, you could bring some sort of local hospitality outreach plan that could be a part of that, and you could have us check that. A couple of things that haven't been touched on. I'm surprised that we don't require events to have their own security. That surprises me, and I don't. And so, I mean, I think we should. I don't think we should necessarily be providing extra police force for event security that then puts our police force and our safety at risk at other points in the week because we've run out of police officers or however it is. And so perhaps I misunderstood something about how exactly that's working, but I thought that's what I heard you say. And so obviously, events should be responsible for their own security. I think that's.
I may have misspoke, sir. They do. So
Okay.
CODA paid for the extra security. I think the challenge is, again, because we're a pretty small police organization, it's calling officers back and then having them be stressed and tired. So I think we need to look at that.
I think to that point, like, if the Prancing Ponies takes extra police officers just in downtown, then I think that particular event should be responsible for those extra police officers. Like, I don't think that the chief, you know, I understand that our police force has to up staff because there are a lot of people in town. And that's certainly, you know, I expect that to be repaid, for example, by TOT or sales tax or whatever it is that funds those. But the extras that are sort of brought in by the car shows, I think that those expenses should, you know, certainly be borne by the permits. And obviously, yes, I think that would be the case, you know, when Karen was talking about the exotic shows and sort of reaching out to them. Obviously, I think that there's you know, the same thing would apply to a show like that. Would apply to a show like that as well.
Yes, the organized events are much easier to deal with than the unpermitted, unplanned. Yeah. And I think the chief's bullet was to plan for event security to alleviate demands on us. So something, again, we can build into our playbook.
And then you also asked about increased fines for motor vehicle violations, and I think Dave talked about that, and I certainly agree with that. You know, let's stop it at the source rather than letting it continue. So thank you. Those are my comments.
Thank you, guys. Do you get enough direction?
Yes, sir.
All right, Chief, thank you. I believe you also have the next item, Chief, which is the adoption of the 2022 Monterey County Multi-Jurisdictional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Not quite as complex, but it is ward night.
So I'm here to talk about the 2022 Monterey County Multi-Jurisdictional Local Hazmat Mitigation Plan. And so what we're essentially looking for is to pass this or make the resolution. And what the hazard mitigation plan is a federal law, if I correct me. I'm new to this particular issue as well. So, this is pretty cool. So the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 requires local jurisdictions to pass a resolution and have mitigation plans in place to get federal funds from FEMA and state funds for in case of emergency services, and to be eligible for grants or assistance ahead of time in planning for mitigation events. So this particular plan, this update, has already been preliminarily approved by FEMA and Cal Office of Emergency Services, and adoption by you will make this the final step in eligibility for disaster funding. The plan includes, it's 400, the first volume is 400 pages and the second volume is another 400 pages. So if you read it all, congratulations. I read all of the first one and the Carmel part of the second one. But the plan includes hazard identification, risk and vulnerability assessments, mitigation strategies to reduce vulnerabilities and the risk from hazards, and strategies to reduce the severity of effects on people, property, and the environment. The history the plan was first adopted in 2007. Was updated in 2016, and this is our now third update, or second update, but third a mitigation plan to come before you. Volume 1 encompasses the entire geographical Monterey County. Volume 2 covers all of the cities in Monterey County, specific cities, and includes Monterey County Water Resource Board and a lot of these other facilities, basically critical infrastructure facilities, were included in the plan as well. This is updated to include Carmel-by-the-Sea stakeholders from a meeting on June 15th in 2021. Those are all of the folks that had input and helped create this document. So thank you to them. The types of hazards discussed in the mitigation plan, but not all inclusive, are a lot of different hazards. And then they're later ranked in order of severity and possibility of occurring within our jurisdiction. The plan covers Monterey County as a whole and ranks the hazards in order of degree of risk they pose to the overall operational area. The assessment of the impacts of physical, social, environmental, and economic assets identifies particular areas of vulnerability and estimated costs of potential damages. The goals for mitigation are listed there, but essentially it's really to pre-plan and kind of help guide us in setting priorities for where we want to create planning, laws, zoning, things like that. And it's really a good reference document for all of our future priority planning. The wildfire mitigation project, which just went to bid or is coming back to bid.
Just approved it.
Yeah, the climate action plan, which was in play, and emergency, and for a lot of us, emergency operations planning, because it's a lot of the emergency operation planning revolves around critical infrastructure and our city vulnerabilities. So the recommended action, we're asking that you adopt volumes 1 and 2. I went through that very quickly, and I apologize for that. I probably should have some water, but I neglected to bring some. So if any questions, please.
That was great, Chief. And I did mention that Mr. Pyrrhic, on behalf of our city and the city of Pacific Grove, approved the contract language for the wildfire mitigation plan for wildfire. So that'll be getting going. And then we certainly see reference in our forest management plan to this document as well. So a lot of documents that tie in together. So thank you, Chief.
Are there any questions of the Chief by council members? I'll open up to the public. Is there anybody in the public in the room here wishing to speak to this item? Okay. Is anybody in the public in the Zoom world wishing to speak?
There's Dr. Revel.
Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep. Everything's
okay,
good.
Great. So earlier on consent calendar, you approved a contract to look at coastal erosion and climate change impacts to the city of Carmel. I am part of that consulting team that will be working with you guys. I'm really glad to see that this is also on the agenda. This local hazard mitigation plan, once we are through our technical work and identifying really suitable adaptation strategies, is a great way to get in line for federal funding. So I just wanted to say I'm glad to see that this is on the agenda. This is something that as we go through this coastal erosion and coastal shoreline planning process to look at future adaptation of the beaches, that this is going to be one of the primary documents that we can get in line for federal funding. So I just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you and looking forward to working with you. And it's great to see this also on the agenda for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. We appreciate your involvement. Is there anybody else wishing to speak to this item tonight? I don't see anybody. Nova?
There's no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion, possible action. Jeff?
Yeah, it's not frequently that we get to thank people from outside the jurisdiction, outside our jurisdiction, for all the work that they've done. But I think this is a tremendous document, and I really would like to thank the County of Monterey for all the work they did. The staff of Monterey County OES, who are all listed at the front of the document. And I know on the Climate Committee, we talked to a number of other Monterey County folks who I'm sure contributed on the back end and aren't mentioned in the front, Ashley Paulson and others. And then I would, certainly like to thank Dr. Revel for coming, for being here and speaking. Thank you very much, and for the work that you are going to do for us, right? Over the course of the next month. And then also Brandon and the chief, and I know Agnes also put in a tremendous amount of work, not only for the Climate Committee, but also for some of the words, a lot of the words that are in this 20-page appendix that will guide us when we find ourselves in one of these emergency situations. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all the staff members of all the agencies that made this possible.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Anybody else?
Yes, I would just like to say I appreciate this very much. And it was very sobering to me, first of all, the thousands or the hundreds of pages in there. But as I paid particular attention to the section on Carmel, which alerts us to all of the planning that goes into addressing all these possible emergencies. We also, need to keep in mind that our water agency, certainly our sanitary district, all of those agencies that we would be very hard put if anything happened to them, they are also within our interest group, as well as our fellow peninsula cities. But I wondered, how will we get progress reports on the things that are in this plan that are not quite all there yet? They're high priorities, but maybe they haven't been funded yet, or moderate priorities. How are we going to stay informed about where we are with this mitigation and hazard plan throughout our county, but particularly here in Carmel, and about our wastewater district and our water district, as well as our our local landfill? How do we get reporting back periodically?
The chief has an answer.
So there really is no mechanism for that in this particular issue. The hazard mitigation plan just says, here is all of the planning and here are all of the stuff that you need to be concerned about and their priorities within the jurisdictions. And then it's kind of left up to the cities and governing bodies to pick the priorities that they have the most importance of addressing, and planning and strategizing about the mitigation of those concerns.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm asking, though, is how does this get put into, whether it's our budget talks, our strategies, our priorities? How do we take this and not just have it lay on a shelf, that we do the things that we need to catch up on, and how do we fulfill that?
I think it's all of those things, ma'am. I think that, one of the goals that the council and I are working on for my performance for the next year, the coming year, is to take the climate adaptation plan and develop an implementation strategy with assignments to community planning and building and public safety and obviously public works and the different disparate departments. So I think you're exactly right that this is not a plan just like our forest management plan or design traditions work that just goes on the shelf, but we use as an implementation tool, and that when we write agenda reports in the future, we reference the goals and priorities in this kind of a plan when we make decisions and we make recommendations to you. So it's a living document, it's a touchstone for all that we do and the way we spend our money and what we spend our money on.
Well, I would very much appreciate, when it does come time to talk budget and CIP and so on, that this plan is referenced along with our adaptation and action plan as well when things come up for us to consider. And I do hope that the community understands that this is every bit as important as addresses and mail delivery and some of the other things that we spend a great deal of time on. This is really how we survive in the future.
Yes, ma'am. You've hit the nail on the head. It takes incredible discipline on behalf of a council to do the projects that are always not the most attractive. Bob jokes about our sanitary sewer system or our storm drain system, things that we have to invest in, and a lot of the projects and priorities and a lot of the plans that we're developing fit into that vein, fit into that mold where, again, there are things we have to do, but the public doesn't see them, and they're not as attractive as some of the beautification efforts that we do.
Okay, so is there any other discussion? I would just say that it does close with a note that, however, implementation of the MJHP will require funding and staff resources. Future funding requests will come forward to this board for consideration of budget process or on a case-by-case basis. I think we all want to see this move forward. So I do think the budget process is going to be where we'll maybe the tires will hit the road and we'll get moving. I'm glad to hear this. But we do need a motion, folks. We need a motion to adopt.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to adopt resolution
Motion and a
2022-96.
Excellent. Any other discussion? Nova, could we get a roll, please?
Okay. Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, now to the meat of the evening, which I think some people have been waiting for. David, provide feedback on the Design Traditions 1.5 strategy plan paper. To Brandon. Welcome.
Thank you. Let me get my presentation pulled up here for you. There we go. All right. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Tonight we're going to be talking about the Design Traditions strategy paper overview. I'm going to run back through the project itself a little bit because it's been some time since we talked about it, but I won't go on about this too long. So the project scope, as you know, is updating our guidelines, doing some amendments to the zoning code, and most importantly, engaging the community throughout that whole process. And a big thank you to everybody so far. It's been a wild and busy 6 or 7 months since we endeavored to start this project, and it's been really, really productive. I'm really proud with the milestones we've achieved so far. So who is the team? The team is city planning staff really leading this charge. That's me, and I'm trying to get involved all of the planning staff and frankly, as much of the community planning and building team as I can. They've come to all the workshops. We are supported by Nori Winter and his company, Winter & Company, who actually also wrote the updates 20 plus years ago when Chip was in a similar position to me. And then the steering committee, who this council appointed to support my team and Nori Winter in this effort, provide guidance and advisory support as a representative of the community. And I always talk about this, and I think this is really important. The team is rounded out by the community. We have been really serious about this the whole time. The community is the other part of this team, you know, call it the 11th man or whatever you want to call it, 12th man. But the community has been just so important at this throughout the community workshops. And of course, the City Council, the Planning Commission, the Historic Resources Board, you all are also on the team. So what we included in the packet for you was the strategy paper, which outlines the direction for the guidelines. It's really what direction is the ship pointed in. That's why we did the strategy paper. And that came out of a lot of feedback. The preliminary meetings we had with you and the Planning Commission, that first series of workshops we did that were hands-on, an online survey that we produced, all of those steering committee meetings that we've been having, and other public correspondence. So it's going to really guide that first draft of the updates that we're going to get to very quickly. The strategy paper was broken in different focus areas. You saw that, so I don't need to go through that. One of the big things we heard was we need to improve the organizational structure of the guidelines. So we talk a little bit about that in the strategy paper, how we're going to do that. Some of the highlights, there's 3 main types of edits: better illustration, adding new guideline topics, and changing the existing guidance if needed. Think about things like we have new roof materials that are out there. We've seen retaining walls in the right of way that maybe we do or don't want to support. So these are the 3 big buckets for the direction, but there's a lot more to it than this. So some of the examples of updated residential guidelines would be more pictures. People understand pictures a lot better than they understand words because they, 1,000 words. So things like this, having the matrices of good and bad examples of specific design topics that we're going to talk about in the guidelines, like fences, parking and access. What does it look like? What should parking and access look like? So having more pictures, yeses and nos, check marks and X's, things like that. So it's a little bit more illustrative. Other recommendations that have come off all that feedback that we had talked about earlier: improve the administration of the design guidelines, deciding where a guideline might move to become code, in other words, become law versus a guideline. Consider how a design review board could be implemented and brought back to the city, and scheduling regular training for not only decision makers but also for staff and any members of the public that want to learn about how the design guidelines work. As part of this, we're also opening our zoning code to look at how we can make the zoning code better at implementing the design guidelines, because really that's what the zoning code does, is it's the way that we put the design guidelines into action. So really quickly, I'm going to run through the results of our first workshop. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You all know we did it. But we heard some of these big themes that informed our strategy paper that you saw. Some of these, context really makes a difference, attention to detail, the authenticity of materials. We did a lot of really great activities. We did favorite streets, designing a house, some of which were done last time. You can see we pulled together a lot of really good information. This picture, what it represents, all the red lines, are streets that people said are their favorite streets in town. And what we did is we gathered all the notes. Why was this your favorite street? What is it about this street that makes it special? Why is it your favorite? Are there things about this that we can encourage on other streets and other developments in the future when someone comes in for a project to try to make every street a favorite street, basically? So you can see some of the things that came out of that information gathering. More workshop activities. These were big 24 by 36 pieces of paper where people wrote on developments and told us what they did and didn't like. And again, I'm just going to run through these quickly because all of these pieces of feedback are what informed the strategy paper that you have in front of you. So my point in showing you all that is that, the strategy paper represents a bunch of information gathered from all sort of different data points. It's not just my staff, it's not just the steering committee, it's not just Nori, it's not just you, and it's not just the community. It's from everybody. So I really feel like the strategy paper is pointed in the right direction, but that's why we're here tonight, is to make sure from all of you that we are right about that. So we also did that online survey. Again, I'm not going to belabor this because we did post those results. But you can see some of the things that we learned from this about forest character needs to remain a priority. We learned about roof pitches a little bit. But again, like the survey we talked about earlier, surveys are not scientific. They're anecdotal. It's just one piece of data in a larger set. So we don't hang everything on the survey. This survey gave us some ideas of where at the October workshop we asked some more questions to try to get more granular explanation from the public what they were thinking on these things. This talked a little bit about style, if the style is the thing that's most important, or if it's really about the size of and the form of the structure. We talked about downtown building massing, which gets to being very important because we all know we have to find a place for housing in the city. So downtown is an obvious place where that might need to happen. So we talk about bigger buildings in the downtown area, more 2 stories. So we need to think about massing. We learned about that. Alternative materials. There's new roofing materials, new siding materials, man-made materials versus purely natural materials. And then we had our October community workshop, which you all know about. Some of you were able to attend, which was great. We had representatives from Council, Planning Commission, Historic Resources Board, and Forest Commission. It was wonderful. 63 people in total joined us. Some were in the room, some were in Zoom. Generally, the positive feedback on the strategy paper, that was one of the main things we were asking the community for, is did we represent what you've told us over all these months correctly in this strategy paper? And resoundingly, I would say that was a yes. That workshop was attended both by our steering committee, some of whom are in the room tonight, some of whom are on Zoom, and also my staff in community planning and building, and Nori Winter and his team, so we could make sure we could hear that feedback from the community firsthand. We did the community workshop in October a little bit differently. Participants filled out individual workbooks as we moved down from the bigger funnel of the hands-on big theoretical exercises down to now, did we get the strategy right? Are we pointed the right direction? We're getting more individualized feedback, so that's what we got, were those individual workbooks. We got over 40 of those handed in. And now what we're doing is we're gathering feedback from the Planning Commission and Council before we actually start putting pen to paper and drafting these guidelines. So this last month and a couple weeks has really been dedicated to rolling out the strategy paper and listening with open ears and open minds if we've hit it the right way. So we spent about 7 hours total with the steering committee going through it page by page. We got some great feedback from them. Then we rolled it out to the community. Then we brought it to the Planning Commission. That's why we're here tonight for you, is to ask questions about that. And I'll just show you some pictures for those of you that weren't able to come. You might see some of yourselves in the pictures here. But it really was a fun, well-received evening. We had, proctors or call them helpers at every table. So scheduling-wise, what's next? So you can see in orange where we're at right now. We just got the feedback from the Planning Commission, and now we're here tonight asking for your feedback. Once we get that, over the next couple months, we will begin drafting those guidelines, actually putting pen to paper. And then we'll have another community workshop in the first part of the year to show the community those guidelines, because again, the community is such an important part of this project. We'll get that feedback, and then we'll bring that feedback along with our draft guidelines to the Planning Commission and City Council to once again get feedback there. And then we'll go back and do some probably more editing because we'll have some more direction. And then eventually in spring of 2023, I'm sorry for the typo, spring of 2023, we'll start the adoption process. So really quickly, just to tell you what we heard from the Planning Commission last month, we asked 3 main questions, which we're asking of you tonight as well. Does the strategy paper capture early PC feedback and direction? Generally, their answer was yes. Does the strategy paper capture community feedback that they have heard from the community? The answer was yes. And were there any glaring omissions or inconsistencies? And the answer was no. We did receive a couple of other points of feedback. Make sure that we consider privacy and views in the design guidelines. So the zoning code talks about privacy and views, but the guidelines not so much. So do we need to put something in the guidelines of how you design something to accommodate for those protection of privacy and views? Second stories in downtown I mentioned earlier for housing. Addressing the issue of precedent, I think that when you roll out a new set of guidelines after 20 years of something being on the books, it's important to mention somewhere in there, at least be clear, that this is the new set of guidelines, and just because you were able to do something in the past doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it now. And then being aware of other state laws, and we've talked about this a lot, things like ADUs, housing requirements, water, and making sure that the guidelines are aware of those, not just being totally blind to that. So with that, I am seeking tonight answers to those 3 main questions and any other guidance you might have with respect to the strategy paper, because I said the strategy paper, it points the ship in the direction that we're going to go, and after this we're going to start writing. So we'd love to get your feedback, and I'll leave you with these 3 questions on the screen, and thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Brandon. Well done. Are there any questions of Brandon before we go out to the public at this time by council members? I don't see. Sorry, Carrie.
It's more not so much a question, but I welcome any feedback from the public, but also from the steering committee. So thank you.
All right, I'll open it up to the public. David, first person in. Sorry to cut you off earlier, sir, but
not at all.
I'm a process freak.
I just wanted to thank all of you and your predecessors for making such a beautiful town. It's really an amazing place, and it's world-renowned. When we were helping people in France protect their little village, we showed them what Carmel has done and how you've built your commercial facilities and yet kept your forest and your beach nice and the charming homes and the traditional feel of it, and they really loved it. So that was a great example, and when we decided to come back to the States, this is where we wanted to be. So I just wanted to share with you my gratitude. I love being here, and to ask you to please consider the element of tradition in architecture. Keeping it traditional is something that will maintain its character for the long run. So that's essentially what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Don't be a stranger either. Is there anybody else in the room wishing to speak tonight?
My leg's asleep by now.
At least the rest of you is awake.
I was eager to show you our over 80 feet of petitions that I will not unfurl because I'd have to furl it again. That goes on. And that is 847 supporters of what? Well, here's the comment that they signed on. The following residents of and visitors to Carmel love our village character, and we respectfully ask that the City Council and the Planning Commission reassess the approval process for demolitions, remodels, and new construction. Please consider the ambiance that has been Carmel for over 100 years. It is being eroded with Anywhere USA buildings. You've heard that before. Sterile facades and box-like structures, including use of excessive glass and industrial materials that do not fit into the old world charm of our village in the forest. We've gotten these petitions both from the post office and from the farmers market once a month, and it represents 43% of 93921s in Carmel-by-the-Sea, 19% of sphere of influence, 29% of our visitors who sometimes feel even more strongly than the residents, and 9% didn't put down their zip code, so we don't know where they're from. Plus 110 supportive Facebook respondents, and there were 10 people that were not supportive, but 110 who were. So my message is simple. Carmel's fate is in your hands, and in Brandon's very capable hands as well. Carmel is extraordinary and deserves to be protected for future generations. It has fallen vulnerable to the pressures of demolition and development. People are bringing their Anywhere USA house designs into our tiny residential tree-lined streets without consideration for blending in with this village character. The bigger, the squarer, the more glass, the straighter, the flatter, the taller, the better. The vast majority of residents disagree with this and what Carmel is and was created to be. I really don't think this is difficult. I think hundreds, if not thousands, of other communities around the world have managed to save their historic towns, the ones worth visiting anyway, and let's just do this. We are encouraging locals to support, through their vote, leaders who protect Carmel from the pressure of change in the name of progress. And thank you so much for your attention, and thank you so much for all that you do for our city.
Thank you for the comments. Thank you for your time. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight in the room? All right, we'll take it out to the Zoom world. Is there a Zoom members wishing to speak?
Yes. We have Graham Norton.
Okay. Floor is yours.
Sorry, just unmuting. Good evening, Mayor and City Councillors. Firstly, I'd like to applaud and recognise the sincere endeavours that Brandon Swanson has put into this project. A daunting project, but in fact, actually, he has done his utmost. Unfortunately, apparently, we are still referred to in the higher echelons of power as the Carmel Karmas. In the same token, I'm sure they will not be offended being referred to as the Carmel Changers. Carmel Changers. You are the custodians for a short period in the 100 rich history of Carmel-by-the-Sea. 1 square mile, not a vast area. If I know local government officers, they will quite rightly wish to further their careers and move on to bigger and better opportunities, thus possibly leaving the residents an irreversible legacy with these proposed design introduction changes. Should these changes be introduced, it is the residents who for the next 20 years have to live with mostly non-resident decisions, and the major attractions of Carmel will be gone forever. Maybe I won't be here in the next 20 years, but the finger will still be pointed at the decision makers of today. So it is a very, very difficult decision, and hopefully one that is considered quite deeply, lest we forget. And what is that famous adage? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Graham. Neil Cruz. Neil,
Sorry.
There we go.
Thought I knew how to work the damn computer. There's a book that was written by Joan Crone. She was head of the Housing and Interior Design and Architecture Division of the New York Times, and the book is called Home Psych. And she said, something I really noticed very interesting about all these modern homes that we were going to photograph and put on the front pages of magazines is that in almost every case, when I went to the home, they all had a separate room that they lived in. You say, yeah, here's the house, and oh, it's beautiful, and it's perfect, and everything is, yeah, but we don't actually live there. Here's the family room with all the papers spread out and the couches and the books open and everything. And she said, that's kind of a statement to me about modern architecture. It's not really for living, it's for looking, it's for putting on the show. Anyway, I'd like to present what I think would be an amazing opportunity for Carmel. What if we held to this old magical vision of Carmel? Remember our cottages, our fantasy homes, and and some of these magical houses that just make you wonder where they came from and what era. They're timeless. The old European look, the handcrafted look, the warm wrapping enclosure of our cottages that makes us feel so at home here, so relaxed. We're not putting on the dog in Carmel. We're coming here to live, and we're coming here to be with each other. What if we did that, we held to it, and we reinforced it to where our architects, instead of trying to somehow get a modern house into Carmel, they let go of that and they said, let's work with all these other designs and let's do something magical and wonderful that hasn't been done before. You would no longer need, from our experience in farmers market, you would no longer need any marketing for tourism. They would come here in droves because we would be the last place standing where they could see that old, magical, wonderful world. You guys, it's not just about being in love with things from the past. It's about the fact that things were better in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil. Janice Bradner.
Yes, I want to really thank Brandon and the whole steering committee with all of their efforts on bringing us all together as a community to have some input on this. But I did want to say that I'm going to go to a little story. In August of 2005, my husband and I traveled to San Marino, and it was in part to see the distinctive architecture of the island, which creates such a charming and magical experience for the visitors. And I know that I could go back now almost 20 years later, and those beautiful white buildings with the blue roofs will still be there unchanged. And that's because the community treasures the structures and realize that these are the primary reason that people visit. Much like Carmel used to be. When we bought our home 23 years ago, we came here because of the Carmel charm. And thank you, Graham, I'm a charmer too. We walked the neighborhoods on a regular basis, taking different routes in order to see the cottages and gardens, each one unique, but still in keeping with the feel of Carmel. Now many of those cottages they're gone. They've been raised in order to make room for boxy modern glass monstrosities in the spirit of making Carmel more contemporary. Gone is the sense that the unique architecture in our little village is one of the primary reasons that people visit. With the tourist trade being one of the main sources of the money in our city's budget, it would seem to me that we would want to do everything in our power to keep that charm so that the tourist money keeps flowing. Instead, we have a group of folks who want to shoot the goose that lays the golden eggs. If we make Carmel look like any other California coastal city, why would anyone want to spend their tourist dollars here? You folks have the powers to shape what our little piece of heaven looks like in the future. Please do everything that you can to keep the village the unique gem that is treasured by the residents and the visitors alike. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janice. Lucinda Lloyd.
Thank you very much, Dave. Mayor, City Council, members of staff, Brandon particularly. This exercise has been really a wonderful opportunity to share whatever visions we have for the future of Carmel. I was born in Carmel 81 years ago, lived majority of my life here. I did live in England for 7 years and have lived in a couple of other places. Architecture has always been part of my interest in that my dad built all the houses that I ever lived in. And the predominance of them were mid-century modern in that he did his building right after World War II. I am not opposed to pieces of glass that do, as my father said, bring nature into our homes. As I've looked around the houses in the residential district during this exercise over the last few months, I have noticed some really exquisite, what would be termed modern architecture, the quality of which is just beautiful, and it fits in with the neighborhoods. I've also noticed that there are some additions to some of the cottages that have a more modern feel to them. And I'm not saying, let's turn Carmel into a haven for quote unquote modern architecture, but I do think that we need to recognize the eclectic nature of the architecture in Carmel and make sure that every building that is constructed is of quality and does fit in with the residential neighborhood. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight? Not seeing anyone, Nova.
I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
All right, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council for direction and comments. Council members.
I do have a question. I see several of the committee here. Do you feel comfortable making any comments, or are you just listening tonight?
I don't want to pop up, but I don't want to make any comments. I just want to let you know that I'm personally supporting the staff report, but the committee hasn't prepared any remarks.
Okay, I just wanted to check.
Some other time, if you like.
I just wanted to check on
Let
that.
that note that that's Victoria Beach suffering slight foot injury, it appears.
Well, I'll start. As you know, I've been very interested in this from the very beginning, and from the very beginning when Brandon and I sort of enlarged the 1.5 exercise that we're doing, and I think we made it better than the first go-around of what it was going to be by adding a community-oriented committee to it. And each of the 5 of us chose someone who is very well thought of in the community. But as I looked over this, I think it's an excellent, excellent strategy paper. There are a couple things that I particularly wanted to mention, and maybe they're in here and I just didn't see it, or maybe it's just stated differently. But I'm very interested that all the documents that are related to the design guidelines gets addressed together, so that we don't go through this process and then we go, oops, now we have to do something else. I'd like to see all of the, whether it's policies or ordinances or zoning codes, be part of this process, so that we actually have enforcement capabilities, and we have a clear document that people can actually pick up and look at and be guided by, so that they don't necessarily just come to the community, buy a house with something already in mind, that they take a look at our guidelines and they let them guide them in their design, and working with our very, very nicely trained staff to understand from the beginning of the process that we're all in this together in a way as a community, because we all do really care. I wanted to make sure that this ends up ensuring that all the processes related to the design guidelines, like training, public education, applications, notifications, and enforcements, are also addressed. So that is part of the whole thing. We don't want to do a half job. I'd like to see the firming up all the design guideline language by removing some of the discretion that are in some of our guidelines now. Shall is a much stronger word than should. And sometimes some of our guidelines, I think, are a little more directive rather than really instructive. So I think that that creates confusion, and it creates too much subjectivity when people then go to try to understand. I'd also like to see a section added that would simultaneously deal with some of the design aspects of our RENA process and some of the SBs that have come down from the state. We have to take a look at these housing elements as part of our design guidelines, because we want any new housing that we bring into this community to fit, to be part of the community. We don't want to put a block of apartments that don't fit the Carmel character. I once attended a lecture by Vince Scully, who was one of the famous architects at Yale University. And he said, why do we build public housing that looks like prisons? Public housing and affordable housing should look like the other buildings in the community, maybe just a little smaller or joined or a little different, but they should reflect the community. So I think it's going to be very important as we enter this affordable housing challenge that we have, and the opportunities that we have, that it's been talked about and is incorporated into the design guidelines section. I really think it's important to really look at our public right-of-way. That's one of the only things we in this town can actually completely control, because it is the public right-of-way. And what we're starting to see is people encroaching into the public right-of-way as though they can do anything they want in it. And that may be one of the last places we have to really have a successful opportunity at enhancing and perpetuating our forest character. And if it's full of decomposed granite, that's oh, I like that person's decomposed granite, I want it on my street too. As long as we allow these encroachments to continue, these encroachments become something that other people want to imitate. So I think definitely the public right-of-way design should be part of this, and we should be prescriptive in what goes into that public right-of-way. We should talk about which trees will be appropriate, which layering of landscaping will be appropriate. Maybe we don't want succulents all over town. Maybe we don't want hedges that will grow to be 8, 9, and 10 feet high and hide those gardens that are so lovely behind them. We don't allow picket fences and other fences to be that high. Why would we allow some of that landscaping to preclude us enjoying looking at those things? I think the siting of the projects and the setbacks are something that are of ultimate importance. Sometimes just siting something a little differently and the landscaping around it can actually make it fit in more than if it's fully exposed with no trees, no landscaping, no layering. So I think the siting is of utmost importance. I think we need to determine what has caused builders to choose flat roofs. Is it something we did in our past design guidelines that made that more attractive, that made it create more space? And if it's something that we can alter, or if it's something where we can eliminate some of the restrictions on pitched roofs so that people will go back to pitched roofs, approach it in that direction. Because we've done something over the last many years to create this, style, I think, or to make people want more of it. Now, I'm not against an eclectic community. I think some of the very beautiful houses have been built, and I echo the speaker that talked about quality. Quality construction to me and quality design is very important. I noticed that a lot of attention is spent on the forest. We're a village in a forest. We want our trees. We want to enhance our forests and so on. But I don't see any best design practices yet in the design guidelines to save trees. And I think that that's a real missing thing. If you have a beautifully treed lot, maybe you have to build on pylons or piers, or maybe you have to use an air, I forget what it's called, an air hammer to get the soil out from the root structure rather than just going in and digging and plowing away at it. So I'd like to see a lot more design about saving trees, because once our upper canopy on the private property is gone, I'm not sure we will ever fully get it back due to the space constraints. So I think that's important. Too many high fences, gates, and portals, too many formal things are starting to infiltrate. We were a lot simpler for a long time. The picket fences, the wooden fences, the pretty wooden gates. Now we're getting, very formal portico type gates that I think it might be good to discourage. I noticed that this community does not have point of sale inspections. Point of sale inspections can correct encroachments that took place after final inspections. Some people go in the minute that the final inspection is over and they put in a new patio and they put in other things. So that's something we could start to consider, because that can correct encroachments. It can correct hardscape that was built without permits, and it can also go in and find that some of the replacement trees that were required are now missing and enforce that. Let's see, I'm not sure that keeping all our buildings in the downtown area will be possible with some of the challenges we are going to have about adding housing, so I don't think that that should be a hard and fast, you must keep 1 story or 2 stories. I think we are possibly going to have to take the example of the building on Dolores, where the setbacks are going to allow for 2 or 3 apartments above, and it won't look like a very tall facade due to the setbacks. I think we should take every chance to correct encroachments, fence heights, etc. I've been disturbed over the last many years when I see an extensive remodel going on, and I think, oh good, we're going to get rid of that crumbling asphalt out front. And the remodel is finished, and the asphalt or the DG is still there. That was an opportunity when people are coming to get a permit to say to them, there's an encroachment out in front of your home that is no longer allowed, and we'd like you to remove it as part of this project. And I think we could have a very powerful effect on the whole town if we did take the chance to correct those encroachments and too high of fences and so on. I don't think just because a 9-foot fence was in place for the last 50 years that necessarily should be grandfathered in if it's not attractive or if it's not in our village character. I noticed on the photos, I think the photos are a tremendous thing, and I'm so glad, and I'm looking forward to seeing more included. I look at things on the internet, as most of us do, and I've noticed something that's very effective when they have a yes and a no type, whether it's fashion or whether it is. They put a green check mark on the good, and they put a little red X on the things that aren't appropriate. And I think that might be an addition to consider, because sometimes people don't read those little words that say inappropriate and appropriate. So I know I had a lot of thoughts on this, but I am passionate about this project. I think our staff is doing a great job. I am very, very pleased that the committee that we all chose has been working very diligently, and they have a passion for it as well. And Brandon, I thank you very, very much. I'm looking forward. Bobby and I are going to be part of an ad hoc committee on affordable housing. I'm looking forward to how we can also take a look at the village character and how we can create opportunities to build quality or a zone for quality affordable housing as well. And I think it all ties together. So thank you very much. And those are my comments. Probably come up with more as the project goes on. So forgive me, but as I said, I'm very passionate about this. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is anybody else? Jeff.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a laundry list of alterations as Karen does, but I do have a couple of answers to your questions. The answers to questions 1 and 2: does the strategy paper accurately affect the direction? Yes. Does the strategy paper reflect the feedback? Yes. On section 3, when you put up that slide on section 3, you had an other feedback section at the bottom. And so I think some of these sort of top level comments that I have are probably more appropriate for other feedback. Karen touched on the differences between zoning code and the design guidelines, and that's also something that I'm interested in. But I'm not really interested in what goes where. I'm interested in how you make the decision about what goes into the zoning code and what goes into the design guidelines. I think Karen talked about things being required versus things being suggested, and maybe that's something that you could, maybe there's an idea there that you could put on paper. And I think maybe what I'm looking for is that idea on a piece of paper as to how you drew that distinction between the zoning code and the design guidelines. The second thing was Karen also talked about the landscaping, the public right-of-way or the landscaping ordinance, and I know, Brandon, that we have talked about that before, and I know that a number of committee members have talked about that, so I wanted to just emphasize my my interest in that as well. I know that the subject of do we have the funds to promote landscaping ordinances come up, and I hope that if you make that decision that we don't have the funds but we do need the ordinance, that you'll come back to the council and that we will authorize that. I hope we will authorize that, because I also feel that that's a piece that's missing out of the current design guidelines, and that we start to stray away with some of the things that are going on in the public right-of-way. Two things that have come up sort of recently in other applications. Michael LePage, when he was talking about the pit last month, asked the applicant, how does your project satisfy the guidelines major principles? So, you know, the commercial guidelines right now are sort of disorganized, but there are a list of principles there. And I think Mr. LePage put it back on the applicant to say, these are the things that we have said are important in our design, you know, in our building code. How does your project that you are proposing for this piece of property, big piece of property in the downtown, how does it satisfy those design guidelines? And I think that there's something there. So I think that rather than having staff decide, rather than having staff go down a list of principles that are maybe important or not important or somewhat important, and maybe having yes and no, and maybe you get to slide on this one because you overachieved on that one or something, that we could instead adopt a sort of quality checklist in terms of these are the principles that are important to us. It has to fit into the forest, you know, it has to satisfy these setbacks or whatever the requirements are that are in the design guidelines, and we can make it sort of proactive on the part of the applicant, so that the applicant is aware of what his or her expectations are when they come to the committee, rather than having the staff and the planning commission have to sort of ferret out whether these things. There should be a proactive thing, and I'm always reminded of the statement that Barbara Livingston made, you know, years and years ago, that building in this community is sort of a privilege, not a right. And I think that that's important. So I think that this sort of the proactive thing, I also think that that will set the applicant up for success and the planning commission up for success, in terms of they understand, you know, we gave you this list of things that were important to us at the very beginning of the project. We didn't make you go out and read this, you know, 50-page book on design guidelines and zoning codes and all this. Here are the things that are important, and you can find more detail in these other documents that we have provided. And I think that that would set sort of expectations at the beginning of the project. And finally, something else that's sort of come up, you know, in our conversations and other conversations is you know, this might be missing from the project, and maybe this is too much, but a homeowner's guide. So I know a lot of homeowners are flummoxed by what requires a permit and what doesn't require a permit. You know, you and I had this conversation that I was surprised that painting your house a different color requires a permit. And I know we talked about that, you know, when we heard that appeal a few months ago, the house that was painted white with black trim. And so I think that there's a lot of confusion in the sort of residential community about what sort of changes require permits, whether it's paint color, obviously roof, everyone knows that a roof requires a permit, but I don't think that everyone knows that a paint color requires a permit, or various landscaping changes in the public right-of-way. I think that those things are important, and I think they also serve to set expectations of what I don't think of it in terms of what the expectations are on the part of the homeowner. I think it's sort of an expectations are sort of a guide to, this is how we think about our community. You know, there was a house, and I told you there was a house down the street from me that was bought maybe 10 years ago by a couple from Florida, a big, huge house on the corner of Camino Real and 4th. And the first thing they did when they moved in was they painted the entire house siding and trim white, and they planted jacaranda trees in the front. And so for 3 years, it was this white house with these purple trees, and then the water bills, I guess, caught up with them. And the purple trees kind of faded and faded and faded and faded, and now the purple trees are gone. And I'm sure you know which house it is. So it's sort of a glaring, you know, violation of what I think the rules are, but I'm not quite sure. So I think that homeowner's guide would be a useful thing to add to the sort of list of things that you produce, if there's funding or whatever. And finally, I would like to, I know this has been a sort of rocky, sort of frustrating process for the steering committee members. I see two of them back there lurking in the back, and I've seen at least two of them online. I haven't seen Melanie online, but I would like to give a shout out to the five of you for being patient with staff and with us, and especially for all the work that you've put in making this project a success. So thank you very much, the five of you.
Thank you, Jeff. Carrie?
Thank you. I very much appreciate Karen and Councilmember Filito and Barron's comments and the attention to detail. I think that's really, really important, just so Brandon gets the answers he needs. I do agree that the strategy paper is capturing the council and has good direction. And through the workshops, through the steering committee, I think we are capturing community feedback. So I like the direction things are going. I'm appreciating the public workshops. I like how that they are very interactive, because I've looked at them online. And you're trying to get answers out of people. Sometimes when you have a workshop, there's not a lot of back and forth, but I really feel that the workshops are getting residential and public feedback. One thing in terms of Jeff's comments about homeowner's guide, I was just talking to a real estate agent about we need something so people know you can't cut a tree more than 4 inches down. And we've tried to reach out to real estate agents, and it's not working. So we need to do something. So thank you for mentioning that. I think I appreciate the emotion to Carmel architecture, but I do appreciate the diversity of styles. I live in a house that is not your typical Carmel cottage. So, I kind of take offense sometimes when people say we just need a cottage, because then my grandmother would not have been able to build my house. But I think architecture has to be done in a way that, like people say, is done right. And the idea of having principles that we can guide people on style, I think, is really important. I do appreciate the steering committee because they're really speaking for us. They're also representing the community. And I think that their participation is really important. I think they have an advisory role. They have a consensus building role with the community, and they're going to be reviewing the draft. So I know how much work is going to be involved, and I really appreciate. The other thing that steering committee is, the staff, we really appreciate the work they're doing, but a lot of staff have not lived here for a long time, and the steering committee people have. And so that's the element where I think the staff need to recognize that there's a historical perspective there. So the committee is really, this project is forward-thinking. It's a forward-thinking project. And so I know it takes a lot of work. This is huge. It's really important to the community. I think it's on the right track. One omissions or inconsistency is, I think because we're looking at the future, the building materials, we're going to run out of things in the future, natural things. So I would like to see some mention of building materials that look natural that people can start using. because I think, we're going to run out of redwood trees and we're going to run out of things. So I think we need to kind of take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Bobby?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brandon, and the steering committee and all the participants in this. It is a great document, and I agree with it, what the people have said before me. I will agree also with the homeowner's guide. And maybe at that point, Brandon, you can reach out to a couple of our local realtors that would be happy to help you with that and have some input from them, some of the local ones that live here. With what Carrie said about the new materials, the synthetic materials, as you stated in here, I agree. There are some great new materials coming out that are fire retardant and safer. And the trick, I think, will be in the wording, how you're going to word that, because you can't say, while we used to avoid using synthetic material, now we're going to okay it. But that doesn't mean you can throw in that old aluminum clad window or, so it's going to be really tricky, I think, for you to make those words that, yeah, we are okay with synthetic materials, but they have to look and feel a certain way and maybe recommend different companies that you know of or something like that. But good luck with it and great job. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Well said. I'm not going to perpetuate governmental redundancy by repeating everything that's been said, although I agree entirely. For me, I was looking at hopefully that there would be areas that I would think that we would be looking at that were addressed. I was worried about, volumetrics. Are they handicap design? I was worried about the setbacks from front yard setbacks for garages. Those things are all touched on. The issue about are we going to lose our zoning because of the fact that the mandates are being handed down so rapidly from on high from the state? When we talk about the facts that we need affordable housing, but are we going to compromise our zoning ordinances to do that? I don't think we should. ADUs were mentioned in that area. I think you guys are doing a great job. I really want to thank our individual appointees for taking that leadership position, the commission as a whole, staff, everybody. It's an excellent job. Hope you've got enough feedback tonight for understand that we're very much in support of what you're doing. We really appreciate the hard work. And David, you're welcome anytime you want to come and say something like that, nice like that. I'll make it out in our public comments. You just come in generally and say something nice.
Well, I'm good at saying nice things. So, I'm really impressed because I looked at the design guidelines that you had before. You didn't want me up here?
Fine.
Well, anyway, you're doing great.
You are great, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did get the feedback I was looking for, so thank you for that. And thank you again to the steering committee members that came. And I did want to mention Nori Winter was online. He was listening to this the whole time, so I forgot to mention that at the beginning, but Nori was also online with us. So thank you all for the great comments. I took about 8 pages of notes there. My hand hurts.
Oh, it's been excellent. Don't screw up. All right, so we are about almost 2.5 hours in this meeting. I get a feeling we should probably take a bio break. Does anybody want to, or do we want to just get this one last bit? Why don't we just get out the pay increase for the general manager out of the way? So Bobby, you were the subcommittee of one that organized a review of CHIP's performance evaluation, annual performance evaluation.
Right.
Thank you for doing that. I want to thank you for doing an excellent job, really.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. So every quarter we meet with Chip and go over his professional goals that we have set or talked about throughout the year, and we'll do this every quarter. But once per year, we do hire somebody to come in and facilitate all of our comments and create more goals and sort of put everything into synthesis. And so this year, that's what happened, and we all felt that Chip was doing his job. He did a great job. He hit some great goals. One of them that I'm particularly proud of Chip for is this is the 5th year in a row that we had 0 errors on our in our accounting department. And so with that, I will turn it over to Chip or Dave. Or
I think I'll be the one presenting on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the item is to authorize the mayor to execute a 6th Amendment to the city administrator's at-will employment agreement effective October 1 of 2022. The background with respect to the previous employment agreement, the original one, that was approved on February 2nd of 2016. So The base salary currently for the city administrator is $216,650, and the proposal is to provide him with a 7% increase of his current salary. That would be $15,165. So the total base salary will be $231,815. So the recommended action is to approve the proposed resolution, and I can answer questions if there are any.
Well stated. I don't think there's any questions. Are there any comments or anything? I think we're pretty good. I think, Chip, you're doing well. We will very well. We've always been fully. Yeah, I was going to go ahead. Yeah, right. Good idea. Is there anybody in the room? There's nobody left in the room. Is there anybody in the Zoom or anybody in the Zoom or left that wants to comment on this? There's literally nobody here. All right, I don't hear anybody or see anybody. Bring it back. Chip, I just want to say on behalf of the council, we are impressed with the job you're doing. You're part of an important part of a team here. You may be not the captain, but you're at least a good quarterback. And I really appreciate that. So it's on behalf of myself, I want to thank you for your years of service and look forward to many more. You want to comment?
Yeah, I think that my annual evaluation and my quarterly evaluations are some of the most important things that the council does. As this council and previous councils that I've worked with, now Councilmember Beach was in the audience. She was in my hiring committee. Councilmember Tice was the only member up here that originally hired me, for better or for worse. But it's very hard for me to talk about myself, and you all know that. It's hard to say I, especially when I've got such a great team of colleagues and associates to work with. And it really is a team effort. This is a team sport. Mr. Mayor, you hit the nail on the head. It's part art, it's part science, and I'm just so grateful to work in a place where there's this mutual high level of respect and communication, and I'm just grateful for you. I measure my time here not by the loss of hair, but as the growing in wisdom and camaraderie and just the wonderful things that we've gotten to do. And I'm certainly proud of the positions that we were able to fill. We've got 2 wonderful new employees in the room, in Chief Ward and Supernova, and there's 28 other new employees out there with your guidance, Council. And you've met some of them, and they're wonderful people, and they're working hard for the village. And I'm real grateful. So thank you for the ability to serve. I remain humbled and grateful every day.
We have a motion then.
I think the 3 of us would like to make comments too, if that's okay.
Fine, yes, of course. Good grief. Of course.
Well, I will go ahead. I think right now I am pleased that Chip is our city administrator, mostly because of his very, very strong planning background. To me, that is so valuable right now with all of the balls in the air, with all the planning things that we are doing. Right now, that's probably the core of what the city is doing, except for Bob over there rebuilding the city in many cases. But I think you've assembled a really great team. But as I said, I think your strong planning background, the fact that you were here the first go around during the design guidelines, the fact that you understand planning, which not all city administrators do, I think is just a wonderful asset. It's almost like we get to have you as our administrator and also our backup as knowing that planning is proceeding the way it should be. So thank you very much. I enjoy working with you and look forward to 3 more years.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a pleasure working with Chip, and it's been really nice to see you progress as a leader. City manager or administrator is a big job. And dealing with the public, dealing with employees, dealing with projects. So I've seen you grow into this position. It's been a pleasure working with you. You were agile when it came to COVID and coming out of it. And I'll miss working with you. But I'll get to work with you as in a different role. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
As a community activist. Jeff.
Yes, thank you. You know, when people ask me what my job is or what any of our jobs is, you know, I sort of say, well, we set policy for the city and we go through this budget process every year and we manage Chip and Brian. But, you know, Brian kind of counts too. We, you know, but you know, when I look at your job, you manage everything. You know, you manage the relationship of the city with the partners, Visit Carmel and MCCVB and Sunset Center and PAC Rep. You, to some extent, manage and communicate with the citizens, you know, the Friday letter, something that Doug, you know, who was sitting out there a few minutes ago started, but you have sort of taken over and gotten your entire staff involved in. You do the vlog every Friday. You know, your communication with the people that rely on the city for things is great. And then you manage the employees. And probably most difficult of all, you manage us, you know, the 5 of us. And you tell us what we can and can't do. You tell us that this is a good idea or a bad idea. You know, and over the 4 years that I have been on this council, you know, like Carrie, I will share that you have really grown into that role. And you are the right person for the job. And so I would be happy to make a motion to approve resolution 2022-097.
Perfect. And
I will second that.
happily.
I will second that.
We have a motion, we have a second. Are there any other discussion? Okay, Renee Ivanova, would you call a roll, please?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, with that work accomplished, congratulations, Chip. Good to have you around. We will now take a 10-minute bio break. Return at 7:10. All right, let's take the 7-Eleven motto and get going here. So the 12th item under public hearings, consider resolution 2022-098, amending CDP 18231 to extend the current beach fire management pilot program by 6 months with an end date of May 16, 2023. Brandon, I believe you have this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good
Thank you very
evening
much.
again, Mayor and Council. We're here to request your approval of an amendment to Coastal Development Permit 18231, which is effectively the beach management program. As you recall, as your last in September, you got a report on the beach fire management pilot program and gave us direction on the future, which ended up being propane-only fires and user-supplied devices. The current program, which is governed by a coastal development permit, expires on November 30th, 2022. And as we discussed last time, if that expiration takes place, we'll revert to the city's code 1720-200, which really has no limits on the season, meaning it's year-round, and fires are not restricted to devices. They can just be built right in the sand. So we don't really want to go back there. Council directed us last time to return with an action to prevent that from happening. So what are we talking about tonight? There's a lot of work that has to happen in order to amend the program formally to be propane only. We have to go through a new coastal development permit, amend our municipal code, and also amend our local coastal plan. That's going to require a trip to the Planning Commission, back to you, and then ultimately the Coastal Commission certifying that. So it's going to take at least 6 months. So what we've come to you with tonight is an amendment to the governing coastal development permit, CDP 18231, extending it to May 15th, 2023. What this does is effectively just extends the prohibition period of the current program. As you recall, the program would turn back on May 15th. So we're just taking the extension out to that date. So it'll just continue to prevent fires from being built on the beach. We will possibly need to have an additional amendment if we're not having the LCP adopted by that date, but I'm hopeful and we'll work diligently to get that done by then. So with that, my recommendation is to amend Coastal Development Permit 18231 to extend the beach fire program with a new expiration date of May 15th, 2023. And I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Brandon. Are there any questions by Brandon of council members before I open up to the public?
Yes. Did you mean you might have to have an additional extension, not an amendment?
That's correct. Well, it would be another amendment to the Coastal Development Permit.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how it would be an extension, correct?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
With that in mind, are there any other questions? Is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item? There's still nobody in this room. Is there anybody in Zoom world?
Lucinda Lloyd.
Cindy?
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mayor Potter. Members of the council, I just want to urge you to vote, as Brandon has suggested, so that we can eliminate any opportunity for wood fires on the beach. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to testify? See no one, I'll bring it back to council for a motion or discussion. Any discussion? Jeff?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, I have voted against this sequence of events that's leading to this, the prohibition of fires on the beach, but I will be supporting this action because I certainly do not want us to have unlimited fires on the sand over the course of the next 6 months.
Alrighty, that noted, could we get a motion out there?
I'll make the motion that we move.
Second.
Motion to second. Any other discussion? Could we get a roll call, Nova, please?
Councilmember Barron.
Yes.
Councilmember Tice.
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards.
Yes.
Mayor Potter.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Excellent. Item number 13 is Resolution 2022-099, an agreement between the County of Monterey and the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea for joint participation in the Permanent Local Housing Allocation, PLHA, funding program for the fiscal year 2019 through 2023. Brandon again.
Hello again.
Hello.
Mayor and Council. Once again, here to talk to you about a resolution with respect to the Permanent Local Housing Allocation, or PLHA, funding. I want to welcome Darby Marshall, who's online with us tonight from the County of Monterey. He works with the county's housing department, so he'll be available for questions if needed, but I'll try to get you through this on my own. So just a little background: California Department of Housing and Community Development, who we all know as HCD, has a program called Permanent Local Housing Allocation, or PLHA. And what it is up to $335 million in statewide grants that are dispersed over a 5-year period from 2019 to 2023 for the development of affordable housing. Our city is eligible based on our size and our population to apply for up to $492,000 of that money over a 5-year period. The application window for the 2019 to 2023 cycle closes at the end of this month. So going through a little more background, the specific grant eligibility criteria, it's not like we can just send in an application and say we want $500,000 and we get it tomorrow. There are 10 eligible activities under this program. Generally speaking, it's physical projects, it's creating programs for rental assistance that are managed, creating programs for down payment assistance, those programs have to be managed. It requires quite a bit of program oversight and grant management resources, or having projects that are effectively shovel ready. The city currently does not have any qualifying projects or programs, and any unsecured funds that don't go somewhere by October 31st go back to the state, and they leave Monterey County effectively. Just as a reminder, the city does not have a housing department, we just have a planning department. We are working on housing, but like jurisdictions like Pacific Grove or the County of Monterey, City of Monterey, they have folks that focus just on housing. We don't have that here. So there is an option, a partnership with the County of Monterey. Section 300C of the PLHA program allows for us to delegate those funds to another jurisdiction who has eligible projects. Counties, when they're selected, can be effectively the grant administrator for a city within their jurisdiction. County basically acts as a clearinghouse for our funding, and those funds can be redistributed to the city when qualifying projects arise. It does require an agreement between the city and the county, which is why we're here tonight, but the county does handle all that grant administration work and reporting to the state that I talked about earlier. So what are the benefits of a partnership? Keeps the money in Monterey County. So I mentioned if we don't secure this money somewhere before the end of the month, it leaves the county, goes back to the state. So at the very least, if we never build a project, it at least keeps the money in Monterey County and helps our county out with housing rather than losing it back to the state. The county is a partner with the city, meaning that we have access to their resources of having a housing department to do things like working on applications and reports to HCD and project vetting to make sure that if we do have a project that it qualifies. The city can still direct the funding to specific projects. We get priority from the county. I've worked this out, or not worked this out. This is in talking with the county, and this is what Darby can speak to later. If we have a project that comes available, we can go to the county and say we have a viable project, they check it out, and they can disperse money to us. We do get priority on our funding. This last point is really, really important to recognize, is that because we're partnering with the county and we're adding effectively our money to the pool, that gives us access to the pool. So if there's a project that we have that come through the city that would have cost more than $500,000, think if there's a housing opportunity, North Lot of Sunset Center, Vista Lobos, these bigger projects that are obviously going to be more than $500,000, we can ask the county for money to go towards those viable projects. So it gives us the ability to tap into more funds than we would have had originally anyway if a larger project becomes viable. So with that, I am recommending that we adopt a resolution authorizing the county to submit our application for us and effectively be our manager of these PLHA funds for the 2019 to 2023 cycle. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Are there any questions of Brandon at this moment, or of Darby Marshall from the county? I don't see anybody. Carrie?
So what you're saying at this point, since we don't have any projects, we need to turn the funds over to the county, and then maybe we can tap into them later?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will say this did come to me from Luis Alejo, a supervisor, who said, Potter, you know, you've got an opportunity to go ahead and put your money to use for a better return on your investment later on. It's pretty creative of him, actually, and I said, okay. So I called up Brandon. Brandon jumped on it right away. Appreciate that, Brandon. Thank you. Is there anybody else wishing to question? Anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item? Nobody in the House? Nova?
There's nobody on Zoom.
Okay. Bring it back here for action. Bobby?
Well, yeah, I'll go. I think it's a great recommendation, Brandon, that gets us into our foot in the door with those county funds. And since we don't have any projects ready to go, it makes perfect sense, because ultimately I think what we all want is to create more housing. And so, yeah, great recommendation. Thank you.
Do we have a motion? Do I have a second?
Yes. I actually had something to say. I was muted.
Who's this? Parker. Public comments closed. Sorry, buddy. Okay, next.
Yes, I'll second.
You gave like 10 seconds. I was trying to unmute myself.
We have a motion, we have a second. Is there any other discussion by council members? All right, Nova, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
And item number 14 is the first reading ordinance 2022-004, amending Carmel Municipal Code, Title 15, Building and Construction by adopting the 2022 editions of the California Building, Residential, Energy, Fire, Mechanical, Plumbing, Electrical, Green Building Standards, Historic Buildings, and Existing Building Codes with local amendments. This is something we dealt with last month.
That's the older answer.
That's the last one. Oh, yeah, thank you.
Carmel, good to see you.
All right, good to see you, Mayor, Council. So today, here for this item for the first reading of the 2022 Building Code, Municipal Amendments, and State Building Adoption Ordinance 2022's 4 for Title 24, which includes all codes in the built environment. Just to review the significant changes to our municipal code, the electrical undergrounding amendment simply applies the $200,000 valuation over a cumulative 5-year period prior to and or after the installation of a main electrical panel. For the sprinkler requirement clarification, just simply includes materials used in wall construction for clarification of that requirement. A few of the significant changes to the state codes, once again, extends permit validity from 180 days to 1 year between inspections, increases electrical infrastructure requirements for full electrified homes, including requirements for electric appliances, allows wider door widths in commercial construction, and gives a definition to what we commonly refer to as studios. Allows them to reduce that space from 220 square feet to 190 square feet. So our timeline, I gave the initial presentation at last month's meeting, and the following week gave a public code update presentation here in the chambers. There was no negative feedback received for any of the local amendments, and here we are tonight. Next steps, I'll be here next month for the second reading of the code adoption, and the building code implementation will go into effect January 1. If adopted, the municipal code implementation will go into effect January 7th, 2023. Staff recommendation is to request the city attorney to read the title of Ordinance 2022-004 and motion to waive further reading and introduce Ordinance 2022-4, amending Chapter 15 and Title 24. And with that, do you have any questions?
Thank you, Jamel. Are there any questions of Jamel? Chip.
Chip has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Jamel, one of the critiques we hear from the community is the duration of construction projects. And so you talked about the state allowing the time between inspections to basically double from 180 to 365 days. Two-part question. Number one, do you believe that the development in our village, because of the intensity and the detail that's going into new buildings, do you think that contractors will exploit that? Will they go to the 1 year mark?
Never.
Question A. And then question B, is there a way, does the supremacy clause take effect here where we cannot go back to 180 days if we want to?
Unfortunately, we can't overrule the state. We can't go less restrictive than the state. I do believe a majority of the developers are motivated to finish their projects as soon as possible. Obviously, we have a couple of projects in town that have been significantly stalled. I do have some ideas that I can bring up at a later date that I think that will encourage further development in a faster process.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, speaking as a contractor, it's not to my advantage to take longer on a job. The quicker I get it done, the more I make.
Exactly.
That's just a simple math question. Not a question on my part, but is there anybody in the public wishing to speak to this item? I don't see anybody. Nova?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
All right. Okay, so we need a motion then to go ahead and do the first resolution. Okay. Go ahead.
We need to do request a reading of the title, so I'm ready to do that.
Do that.
Okay. This is ordinance 2022-004, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea, amending Carmel Municipal Code CMC Title 15, Buildings and Construction, by adopting the 2022 editions of the California Building Code CBC, Residential CRC, Energy CENC, Fire CVC, Mechanical CMC, Plumbing CPC, Electrical CEC, Green Building Standards CGBSC, Historical Building HBC, and Existing Building Codes EBC with local amendments.
I'll move it. Also move.
Did you say so moved?
Yes.
Second.
Any other discussion? Jamal, I just appreciated you had two people that showed up in person and 6 that phoned in. Could you just drop a note and say we appreciate their attendance? I mean, it's kind of hard to get the building community to do anything, let alone to come in and do something that's esoteric, so I appreciate that.
Will do. And just so you know as well, Deputy Fire Marshal Carmen Pruy, she's also in attendance as well.
Okay, good, good, thank you. Good. All right, Nova, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, with lightning speed, we're now on item number 15, first reading, ordinance 2022. Yes, 5005, amending section 2.74.010B of the Carmel-by-the-Sea Municipal Code relating to board member qualifications for the Historic Resources Board. And where to go? Nova, you're handling this.
I'll speak on this one. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mayor. This item before you is the first reading of ordinance 2022-005, an amendment to City Code Section 2.74.010B, which is related to the qualifications for Historic Resources Board members. At the last meeting, Council provided direction to staff on what amendments to make to this code section in order to expand the pool of applicants to fill vacant seats. The proposed amendments state that in the event that no resident with the requisite experience can be found, the city shall allow up to 2 members of the HRB to reside outside of the city limits, so long as they demonstrate relevant knowledge or experience in a field related to historic preservation, and they live within Monterey County. The amendment also states that a majority of the board, which would be 3 members, must be made up of residents of Carmel-by-the-Sea. This means that if this ordinance is adopted, the city would continue to encourage applications from Carmel residents, but would also allow those who meet all the requirements for experience, knowledge, or interest who live outside of Carmel, but within the county, to be able to apply and be considered for appointment to the HRB by council. So therefore, staff recommends that council make a motion to waive the full reading of the ordinance, read by title only, and introduce the ordinance. And I'm here to answer any questions.
Any questions on over at this time by council members? I don't see anybody. Is there anybody in public wishing to speak to this item, in the room or out? I don't see anybody. Nope, wait a minute.
Oh, there's a hand raised on Zoom.
Lucinda, Cindy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Cindy Lloyd. I guess somebody's got to speak out. I encourage you to include.
Yeah, we almost got out of here.
Yeah, I know, you almost did. I encourage you to considering expanding the geographic area in order to get more qualified members onto specific boards. That's it.
Thank you, Cindy. Appreciate it. Is there anybody else? Neil Cruz.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just had a thought. I believe that the requirement is for architectural professionals. I wasn't sure if it requires that they be licensed architectural professionals, but I just had this thought that before we go out of the community, to consider that people who have lived in Carmel most of their lives may have a much greater sensitivity to the architectural character of the city than somebody outside with a professional background. And that's all I have to say, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate it. Anybody else? See no one, I'll close the public comment period, bring it back to council for direction. Council members, your preference? Jeff.
Yeah, so thank you. I'll be supporting this like we talked about last month. I think that there's a lesson in here for us when we go to, hopefully, as I've advocated for in the past, reestablishing the design review board and using the methodology that we have here in terms of getting resources and human resources from outside the city with specific knowledge that may be useful for the management of the sort of built environment that we have inside the city. I think there may be something there when we reestablish the DRB.
Well said. Any other comments? Motion?
Yeah, I would. So I would request a reading of.
There we go. An ordinance says 2022-005, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea, amending section 2.74010B of the Carmel-by-the-Sea Municipal Code related to board member qualifications for the Historic Resources Board.
Moved by Jeff, seconded by Carrie.
Second.
Okay. Nova, could we get a roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
All right, is there anything on the future agendas that we have a burning desire to place on the agenda tonight?
Before we go there, Mayor, I noticed that on the item 16 for the urgency ordinance that I did not read the title of that urgency ordinance, so my recommendation is that I do so now, and then you then can waive further reading and adopt. So now I just have to find it. Here it is. This is ordinance 2022-006. This is an urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Carmel-by-the-Sea adopting rules of conduct for attending meetings of legislative bodies at city facilities. So now the appropriate motion would just be to waive further reading. You've already voted to adopt it. So we'll need a motion to waive further reading.
I'll make the motion to avoid further reading.
Okay. Waive.
Second.
All right, motion is second. Nova, would you call a roll?
Councilmember Barron?
Yes.
Councilmember Tice?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferlito?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards?
Yes.
Mayor Potter?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
I would like to note before we adjourn that we adjourn this meeting in member of Charlotte Townsend. Charlotte experienced a charmed upbringing in Carmel, roaming around town and out to Carmel Point to read and play with her friends and ride her pony Charm. After many worldwide adventures, she returned to Carmel and served on the library board, was the first woman elected to the Carmel Area Wastewater District Board, and served as mayor for 2 terms from 1982 to 1986. In addition, she was an accomplished sailor, a reporter for the Pinecone, tennis player, a cook. The list goes on and on. She was an extraordinary person who will truly be missed by the community. Judy and I will miss dropping by for a bottle of wine with her. Not a glass, but a bottle. Had a great time with her. She'll be missed by all, I'm sure. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned in her honor. That was a good meeting. Yeah, damn right.
You didn't give me a chance.